For 30 years, I worked at the edge of the thing that lights up the sky, and the thing finally decided to collect. They call it radiation sickness, which is a very polite name for your own cells filing for divorce one at a time. The first symptom is that you want to sleep. Just sleep. I had read the reports. I had signed the reports. I knew exactly what wanting to sleep meant at my dosage, and lying there in that white room, I still thought 5 more minutes couldn't hurt. That is the joke of my whole life, if you want it. I spent it chasing the glory of the sun, the real one, the one that lives in a reactor core, and I got close enough to touch. Then it touched back. I didn't regret the work. You don't get to almost hold the sun and then whine about the sunburn. What I regretted was smaller and dumber than that. I never once sat all the way through a meal at my mother's table without checking the time. I never married because marrying me meant co-signing the same reports I signed, and I couldn't do that to a person. The universe listened to all of this, weighed it very carefully, and said, LOL, no second chances, buddy. Then it gave me a second chance anyway, which, spoiler, is so much worse. I woke up in a different body in a different hospital, and my very first thought was that dying had not, in fact, taken. The body was small. Kid, small. There was a woman asleep with her head on the edge of the bed, holding my hand like it might float off if she let go, and a blanket over me that smelled like it had been dried outside in real sunlight, the free kind. Her name was Alara. In about 4 seconds of somebody else's memories pouring into my skull, I learned she was my mother now, that this body had belonged to a boy named Kale, who spent 3 years in a coma after a scrap truck flipped on him in the street, and that the boy had died about a minute ago. So I got his room, and his mother, and his diagnosis, which I got to overhear through the door because the first trick this new body could do was crawl. The doctor was explaining to my mother, in that gentle voice they save for when the meter has already run out, that the body was too weak to keep. Chemical poisoning, radiation sickness. I stopped crawling. Radiation sickness. In another universe, on another bed, I had just finished dying of those exact 2 words. I had crossed whatever gulf sits between worlds, changed my species of money and language and sky, and the house special was still on the menu. Even Sterling couldn't treat him, the doctor said. The radioactive elements are part of his body now. My honest advice is to stop. Sterling. There was a name I knew from a comic book, which was my second clue about where I'd landed. Out in the hall, my mother was starting to come apart, so I did the one useful thing available to a barely mobile stranger wearing her dead son's face. I pushed the door open and said, Mom, let's go home first. Home turned out to be a crooked little house in Queens with more personality than square footage, and standing in the doorway, I confirmed the bad news. The superheroes were real here. This was the Marvel world. The one with Sterling, and a spider, and a man who would one day eat a city for dessert. Fantastic. I had escaped one apocalypse and respawned directly into a franchise. Then the good news showed up, glowing quietly in the corner of my eye like it had been waiting for me to stop panicking. A control panel. Mine, and one line on it I read about 9 times. Trait, heart of evolution, learning speed enhanced past the human limit, mind immune to corruption. I want to be clear about what that meant because I'm not going to shrink it to look humble. It meant I could pour 2 lifetimes and every book on this planet into one dying skull and it would hold every page. It meant that whatever this world tried to slip into my head to make me obedient, or afraid, or hooked, would slide right back out. I already knew everyone's story here. Now I had the one engine that could turn knowing into doing before the clock ran out. I told my mother tomorrow would be better. She had come into the room to comfort me. She walked out comforted. I'm counting that as my first win in the new life. Then the panel lit again. Unstable energy detected. Prepare to welcome a new world. And I fell asleep in Queens. I woke up freezing, not cold, freezing. The kind where your teeth are actively trying to resign. The room was raw concrete, and somebody had been very relaxed about the blood on the walls. 2 men in salvage gear stood over a table running inventory, and the inventory was me. Kidneys are cooked. Radiation's in all of it. One of them poked my ribs like he was checking fruit. Biotechnica might still take the corneas. Gears Kang Tao, that moves easy. New world, new dying body, same customer review as the last one. This unit is broken, parted out. I had just enough time to admire the pattern, that I apparently could not stop reincarnating into people the universe had already written off before the door left its hinges. The woman who came through it had a shaved head and the specific calm of someone who has done this many times and found it a little boring. 2 shots, 2 more shots. The organ merchant stopped merchanting. She hadn't come for me at all. She had come for the man they were holding in the corner, a tied-up corporate type named Chen Tao, and I was decor. She jabbed something warm into my arm. The fever spiked so hard I felt like a struck match and turned to leave, which was the exact moment I opened my mouth and bet the only chip I had. The chip being that I had already played her entire life like a video game. You're ace, I said, through teeth that would not hold still. You're the famous one. She stopped. Here is the thing about knowing a person's whole story before you've said hello. It is an incredible party trick and a catastrophic way to make friends. So I didn't hand her the truth. I handed her the useful cut of it. I told her this was Atlanta, not Night City, the surveillance-drowned company town where she just watched a job fall apart, but Atlanta, which meant somebody had lied to her. You cannot walk Kang Tao cyberware into Atlanta's net without a second corporation quietly propping the door. She'd been hired to be noise. A loud, expensive distraction fed to the law on purpose, with her name written on the wrapper. She did not enjoy hearing this, but she also didn't shoot me, which in this city qualifies as the beginning of a beautiful friendship. She threw me some clothes, agreed to listen, and nothing more, and we loaded the tied-up corporate man into the back of her car. Atlanta, it turned out, was the most frightening place I had ever seen, and it frightened me by being clean. Total surveillance. The lowest crime rate on the continent, because every crime here had already been licensed, priced, and filed in triplicate by somebody in a nicer suit than the criminal. Ace lived in a tin shack out in a district called Ironhide, $120 a month, off every grid she could find, because the only privacy left in a place like this is the kind that costs you plumbing. We woke our guest up. Chen Tao came to gently, blinked at the three of us, and immediately tried to buy his way out the door, which told me two things. He was smart, and he still thought this was a situation money could fix. I let him find out slowly that it wasn't. I explained, in the friendly tone of a man reading a weather report, that if I turned him loose right now, every person in that room died within the week, his included. He looked at me for a long moment and decided he would only be speaking to me from here on. Good. That was the whole point. Chen Tao wanted to talk in private, so he flipped off his translator and switched to an Eastern language his guards wouldn't have flagged, and I answered in the same one, which visibly unsettled him. Good. A man who thinks he's the smartest person in the room negotiates badly the moment he isn't sure anymore. His problem had a name. Li Mei, his own deputy, wanted his chair and had decided the fastest way into it was over his boss's body. There was a shipment, Kang Tao prototypes and half-finished components out of the Atlanta marketing division that had to physically move through Night City to headquarters for sign-off. Li Mei was going to hijack it, sell it, and pin the corpse on nobody in particular. Chen wanted the deputy dead and the goods intact, and he did not want to restart his own cyberware or call the company yet, because a man who calls for help from inside a coup is a man announcing he's already lost. Behind him, the shack's little TV was running the local war. Zetatech neural processors versus Militech Sandevistans, each ad insisting the other was garbage. In Atlanta, even the commercials are a knife fight. Then we talked money, which is my favorite language in any world. Chen opened at 1,400,000 to end Li Mei, 4 to move the goods, 200 to keep it all quiet. I let him finish, admired the number, and then explained why it was insulting. I could take down a corporate executive in the most surveilled city on the continent and leave no ripple. He could not. That was the entire market, and in that market he had exactly one seller and no other options. 2 million. A deposit up front, and the local Kang Tao intel thrown in, because a man drowning does not haggle over the price of a rope. He agreed. 400,000 in clean European funds, Li Mei couldn't freeze, and we had a deal. Through the paper-thin wall, I could hear Ace's breathing change. She'd heard every number. She came at me the second Chen was out of earshot, dizzy on the figure. 2 million euros. Then we had our first real fight, which was about how to split it. I said 70-30 my way, because those are street rules and I was the brain. She said 50-50, her way, because she was the one holding the gun and I was a fever in a borrowed body. She won. I let her win, because I didn't actually care about the split. What I cared about was the deposit, and the deposit had a job already. It was going to buy me just enough of a body to keep living, and it was going to buy her enough of a body to become a weapon. She just didn't know the second part yet. We were halfway to a ripper dock when my new body reminded me whose it really was. My right eye flooded red, top to bottom, and for a second or two the wiring between my brain and the rest of me simply unplugged. A seizure. The radiation was winning faster than I'd budgeted for. The clinic was a quiet Kang Tao operation with a ripper doc who was 62 and looked 30 and who took one glance at my chart and said, "You died before me." Then he read me the rest of it, which was worse than I'd let myself guess. Every organ failing. My cells so radioactive they cast a kind of shadow that ruined the precision of any good implant, so only clumsy second-generation gear would even take. My eyes going. And the headline, the one he saved for last. The gray matter in my spine was dying, and when it finished, in 1 to 2 months, I would be paralyzed. There was a fix. A neural implant to replace the dying tissue. It would also shorten what little life I had left. The one bright spot on the whole report was my brain, which he said was superb, wasted on the street, built for cybersecurity work. The panel agreed and paid me 5 science points just for reading the file, which is a strange thing to be complimented on while you're being told you're dying. So I chose the third option, the one he hadn't offered, because Ripper docs offer you the two that make them money. I bought myself the cheapest, oldest, ugliest beginner rig on his shelf, a bottom-tier Netwatch Neuralink, one second-hand eye, the starter tools of a Ripper doc and a netrunner, and I spent the real money on her. Ace watched me sign away a fortune onto her operating table instead of mine and went quiet in a way she hadn't been all day. "You've got guts," she finally said, "so I won't hold back." They laid her open and rebuilt her from the inside out. Subdermal armor, a Kerenzikov to bend her reflexes past the speed of a thought, reinforced tendons, reconstructed bone, a blood pump, bionic joints, the whole €200,000 catalog. She came off that table something close to Superman, and I came off mine with a used eye and a link a school kid would sneer at, and I studied the medical report for 2 hours until I understood 2077 medicine better than the man who'd sold it to me. That's the trade I made. Let her be the fist. I only ever needed to be the reason the fist knew where to swing. But a fist and a brain still weren't enough. To pull a job in Atlanta and walk away clean, I needed 2 more things: a netrunner's safe ground to work from, and somebody powerful enough to keep the law looking the other way at the right minute. In this city, the gangs were veterans associations, Militech-backed, respectable enough to file taxes, and the man who ran the local one was a bald ex-NUSA captain named Mateo Finch. The plan was simple. I would offer Finch a deal he couldn't refuse. On the way to his door, Ace made the observation of the day, watching the association's members clock in on time in their pressed uniforms. In Atlanta, even the gangsters work overtime. Finch's office had a real solid wood floor, which in this world is a way of screaming how rich you are, and a glass wall looking straight down at the Militech Administrative Center, like he owned the view too. He scanned my garbage implants and my ruined health in about a second, decided I was nothing, and started to enjoy himself. I offered $500,000 to bend the law for one afternoon. He laughed. $1 million. He kept laughing. Then I stopped talking about money and mentioned that prototype weapon blueprints were about to leak in transit through his city, and the laughing stopped. His terms came fast because now he wanted it. The blueprints. One finished prototype for his private collection. The executive framed cleanly for embezzlement. And a physical channel out to Night City when it was done. Deal. Ace was furious in the car. He snapped his fingers and took $1 million off you. I let her be furious, then explained why it was the best money I'd ever not kept. Finch's NUSA and Militech backing was the only key that opened Atlanta's net for covert work. With him holding the door, we became bullets. Fired, gone, untraceable. Instead of the gun, somebody dismantles and soaks in acid afterward. We weren't betraying Kang Tao. We were betraying a client who'd already tried to betray us. And for the surgery Chen needed, we needed one Ripper doc in Night City we could actually trust. Ace had a name for that. Sergey. Sergey turned out to be a Night City Ripper doc with an honest face and a boxing match always playing somewhere behind him, and I reached him the long way around, through a cross-network channel I bought for a fistful of science points, and routed through the signal tower apartment Finch had so generously gifted me. A gift from a man like Finch is just surveillance with a bow on it. I knew that. I used it anyway. His first favor to us, without knowing it, was letting Sergey run a remote checkup that found the Netwatch backdoors sitting quietly inside our cheap starter cyberware, waiting to report us. Sergey scrubbed them out. Then I told him the real endgame, the thing I hadn't said out loud to anyone. I was going to need a Sandevistan, not for the speed. To replace the dying gray matter in my spine before it finished the job and left me a statue. Chen came by with the full brief, and it was a good one, because desperate men are thorough. The Kang Tao Logistics Park, 300 acres. The plan file sat on the 7th floor of the office building, behind 5 security zones, and every zone rotated its guard shift on a schedule that left a 25-minute seam where the whole thing breathed at once. There was a physical back door hidden in a display cabinet, a chip key for a hand that knew where to reach. The convoy would roll the goods out by road, and one disguised mechanized team could slot right into the escort and hand the whole thing off to Chen's people a city over. He even offered me a discount Sandevistan to sweeten it. We shook on it. On the TV behind him, an ad promised that a Sandevistan would make me a god, and buried the part where each use is a small, elegant installment on your own suicide. Ace, watching a Kang Tao billboard slide by later, bowed to it, deeply, the way you'd bow to an emperor, purely so she could insult it with her whole body. The heist itself I ran from a screen, which is where I do my best work. I took the 30 camera feed, made it mine, and walked Ace through the park like a level I'd memorized in another life, because I had. A ventilation duct. then a gap between rooftops with nothing under it but a long fall, and a delivery drone passing through at the exact wrong moment, which is to say the exact right one, because I'd timed it. She hit the drone mid-leap and let the Kerenzikov drag time out like taffy, so the double jump landed. I hadn't warned her about the gap. I'd engineered the gap. You do not find out what a reflex booster can really do by practicing in a safe room. You find out over the drop. Then a woman walked out of an office and nearly broke the whole thing, and nearly broke me, because for a second she looked like every late night of my old life. A materials clerk, ordinary as bread, not Li Mei, just a person named Chen Xia with 22 years of study behind her, aging parents, and a phone that had just lit up with a photo from her mother, a bowl of noodles, and the words "come home soon." Chen's voice in my ear said, "Kill her, there's a good spot behind the liquor cabinet." I bought a cyberware skill I couldn't quite afford and used it to fold her into a false, exhausted sleep instead, the kind the trauma team and Kong Tao would read as a tired employee, and nothing more. I told myself it was clean tradecraft, no body to explain. That was half of it. The other half was the bowl of noodles. From her terminal, I pulled the file, Reality Distortion, Li Mei's transport plan, and learned she'd changed the route at the last minute, running it through the wilderness toward Mexico instead. And then, right on cue and much too early, 2 cheap vans rolled up to the park gate. The convoy. We were out of time to plan and into the part where you find out who you are, which is when Finch showed me exactly who he was. He blocked the Atlanta police and Netwatch from his post, as promised, and then sent not one single man, as very much not promised. 1 escort, driver, gunner, medic, machine gunner, 2 smart robots, and 1 ace to take all of it alone. She balked, and she was right to. So I gave her the only thing I had that was worth more than backup, which was a story. I told her that a real legend doesn't need a warehouse of chrome. That somewhere out there was a merc who walked into Arasaka Tower with nothing but starter cyberware and a conviction that burned like a fuse, who cut Cyrus Hammer's hammer to scrap, who burned the biggest corporation in the world down to ash and cinder, like the sun, I said. And I meant the real one, the one I died reaching for. She stared at me, because it was insane, because if a person like that existed, the whole world would be saying the name. And I told it like I'd stood in the room and watched it happen, because in a way, I had. Something in her caught. "Drive," she said. Across town, Li Mei was already congratulating herself. Her convoy was 2 disguised Villefort vans, and she rode them toward the border, cursing her boss's favorite doctrine, deceive your own people first, while a small worry chewed at her that the police still hadn't found his body. She cleared the checkpoint, X-ray and sonar, scanned past, and let herself picture the rest. Sell the prototypes to the European buyers waiting at the motel, kill her own men, disappear across the ocean. She had her pistol halfway drawn for the first of those when a stranger's voice came over the comms. "Lee, you didn't even notice you were being followed." Then the driver's head came apart, and the afternoon stopped being hers. The ambush was mine to conduct and Ace's to perform. I'd bought a cat sniper rifle, a tsunami, 6 electromagnetic arrays, the kind of gun that drives a tungsten nail through a wall and the person leaning on it, and she fired it out of the sunroof while I painted the targets. First truck flipped, rolled, cooked off. "I hit it with my eyes closed," she announced, which was not true and did not need to be. The escort fought back the way professionals do, all business, until I uploaded my first real netrunner puppet, a nasty little NUSA program that reached into their cyberware and turned it against them, and the panel rewarded me 150 science points for the privilege. The gunner's shoulder came apart, his own medic hit him with adrenaline just to keep him useful, and the last truck ate its tires and buried its nose in the dirt. Chen went to finish Li Mei himself. She crawled out of the wreck with half her face reduced to exposed mechanism, and she said something I wasn't ready for. She said she had been Chen's disposable thing for years, her rank and her body arranged entirely around what pleased him, her every promotion a leash. She hadn't wanted the goods, she'd wanted to watch him lose them. Chen looked down at her, mild as ever, and said, "You disappoint me." And that was the end of Li Mei. Then his eyes glowed blue, and my whole world turned red. He'd restarted his cyberware off schedule, which meant he'd stopped hiding, which meant the coup was over and he'd won it. My display flooded with a wall of denials and, underneath, a wanted notice with our names on it, flagged the way they flag cyber psychos and rabid animals, to be killed on sight, no questions, no arrest. Chen had betrayed us the instant we became more dangerous than useful. And then, because a man who's already won can't resist gloating, he told me what was really in the crates. Not just 5 smart SMGs and 5 smart shotguns. A Militech prototype Sandevistan. Next generation. Past anything on the market. Shipped almost naked of software because the research was still open. The kind of thing that could, he said with a little smile, save my life. Ace leaned in and warned me it would also make me a lab rat. I smiled back and told Chen we had a deal, pay first and move the goods, and stole a fresh van while he counted out another 400,000, because a man that pleased with himself doesn't check whether the person he's paying is already 3 moves ahead. Then Finch called. Kill Chen, return the goods, guaranteed safe passage to Night City. I agreed and offered him Chen's cyberware schematics as a bonus and privately set the handoff 40 kilometers out because I had every intention of betraying Finch too. He'd earned it by sending no men. I also quietly sold the footage from my own eye to a broker for 500,000 because if the whole world's going to be a market, you may as well sell tickets to your own war. The desert did what deserts do, which is offer no cover and a great deal of sky for things to fall out of. Ace hummed. I sang a scrap of an old reggae tune to pass the time, which prompted Chen to ask, with real confusion, whether I'd time traveled from the last century. Then Militech arrived. 3 octane drones and a chorus of sirens, and I rewrote Finch's puppet into something that spread on its own, a contagion looking for hosts. Finch, still playing the loyal ally in my ear, told me to make my move. He was right behind me. I typed back 2 words, go, and a second one, I'll let you imagine. My sniper punched a drone out of the air and kissed the side of a Militech car. The upload landed and paid me 100 points, and then the enemy's ICE came screaming back up the line and I threw my tablet out the window a half second before it detonated. If that had been an implant in my skull, it would have been my skull. Chen found this hilarious. Chen, one-handing the wheel, fired the prototype smart SMG out the window, its bullets curving in the air to swat incoming rockets out of the sky. Ace dropped the armored driver of the lead car. Drone fire came down like weather and Ace's subdermal armor ate it. I grabbed a second tablet, sank into the drone's guts, and short-circuited the swarm, 200 points, and for one clean breath, I thought we were going to live. Then a Militech behemoth came out of the dust and rammed us broadside, and in the passenger seat of it sat Mateo Finch, which is how I learned that 3 separate people had betrayed me before lunch. He came off that behemoth already halfway out of his skin, a full cyberware body under the suit, red-hot mantis blades sliding from his forearms, a Militech Peregrine Sandevistan bending 70% of time to his will. He landed on our roof. Ace drifted the car hard, the behemoth flipped, his first cut missed by the width of that maneuver, and he laughed like a man who'd finally found the party. He danced through our homing rounds, kicked the car hard enough to crack the ground under it, and opened the rear like a can. Chen spilled out, and the wreck opened him from collarbone to hip. I was pinned, but breathing. Ace hit the dirt on her Kerenzikov and rolled up standing. Finch walked toward us, unhurried, savoring it. You played me, he said, so I'll arrest you myself. I lay there bleeding, doing the math, and the math was ugly. This was a man who outclassed heroes I'd read about in the other world. I did not have a play. And then I looked over at Ace, flat on the ground, gun still in her hand, and grinning, actually grinning, at the worst odds of her life. And I understood the one thing I'd been missing the whole time. It wasn't chrome. It wasn't points. It was that. Chen's dropped SMG had slid to a stop against my leg. Time, Ace said, to unleash your potential. Ace got up off the ground and did the most Ace thing possible. She lied to a man who could hear her heartbeat. 2 bullets left, she told Finch. Your knife, or my gun. Then she made him choose by not waiting for an answer. He came at her under the Peregrine, and time was his. He slid between her rounds like they were parked cars. And somewhere in the middle of it, his face changed, went somewhere far away, and I realized the old soldier was having a memory. A first wife, a dance floor, a clumsy jump he'd never quite landed, and a woman who died because of some failure he'd spent a whole cyberware career trying to outrun. He settled into a final pose, elegant, almost gentle, and I understood he meant to let her momentum carry her onto his mantis blades so it would look like she'd done it to herself. A kindness in the only language he had left. Here is the part he couldn't see, because no one had ever needed to show him. When Ace crossed into that curtain of gunfire, her movements got sharper, not slower. The Kerenzikov doesn't just make you fast. It reads danger, and it feeds on it, and the closer the bullets come, the more it gives. Finch had a Sandevistan, the god of raw speed. Ace had a reflex booster that woke all the way up only when it was about to die, so I helped it wake up. Those 2 stray rounds of mine that clipped her, they weren't strays. I put them into her subdermal armor on purpose, where they'd bruise and not break, because pain spikes adrenaline and adrenaline is the Kerenzikov's fuel. Her reflex ramp climbed past 90, then past 99, at a range of under 30 centimeters, and in that last impossible sliver of a second, the muzzle of the sniper on her shoulder swung off its line and onto him. How is that possible? Finch said. The tsunami answered. A supersonic tungsten round opened a 12-centimeter crater in the man, and the second shot took his head, and, with it, the priceless prototype Sandevistan he'd been so proud of. Clean. Let me tell you what that was, so you understand why Ace couldn't stop saying it afterward. Killing a Sandevistan veteran of the corporate wars using nothing but a Kerenzikov is the kind of thing they carve into the walls of this city. She was ecstatic, whooping about the Militech elite she'd just put in the dirt, working her way up to comparing herself to the Heavy Hammer himself. I let her have it. Then I told her the quiet part. I'd meant to sell Finch to Militech from the start. I came to Night City to make money, not to be somebody's dog, and he'd broken the rules first. Fresh Militech pursuers were already inbound, drawn by the noise. The plan from here was simple and cold. Flip the 5-ton behemoth, load the goods, vanish, and let the whole scene read as exactly what it looked like from a satellite. A Kang Tao squad and a Militech squad tearing each other apart in the wasteland, with no undocumented ghosts anywhere in the frame. New gunfire opened up in the distance. I got Sergey on the line and prayed Finch hadn't killed our channel, out on his way to killing us. Sergey came on the line, and I fed him a scan of the prototype we'd pried off Finch's corpse, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Then he told me what it was, not a production Sandevistan, the true prototype. Unlimited acceleration, no safety valve, no ceiling, a thing built by people who had clearly never intended a human being to survive wearing it. It could also, he noted, turn the body around it into something like a supercomputer for net running. If you install this, he said, you'll go crazy. It's not designed for humans. Install it on me, I said. I'd like to claim it was courage. It was arithmetic. We were sitting on the exact spot where the moving Rust Belt domain grinds against the next one, and while a boundary like that crosses, the network defenses on both sides thin out and the ICE goes soft. It was a window, one window, closing, to knock every pursuer off the net and walk out of this desert as nobody at all. And the gray matter in my spine was already dying. A spine that's going to quit on you in a month is not a spine you're precious about. There was no time for anesthesia and no quiet to have it in. Rounds were punching through the container we were hiding in the whole time, so Sergey opened me up while the war continued outside, cut into a spine that was failing anyway, and the surgery hurt exactly as much as you're imagining, right up until the panel noticed and simply deleted the agony from my awareness. Severed nerves, a spine coming apart and being rebuilt out of alignment, and I lay there reading netrunner theory off a tablet on the table because the pain was gone and the clock was not. Sergey kept glancing at me like I was the thing he should be afraid of. Outside, Ace was dying the loud way. The drone swarm had her, and there was nothing to shoot back at, just light. The drone's bullets are light, and you cannot dodge light. And her sniper only held 4 rounds before it needed feeding, and rockets kept picking her up and throwing her back down. She was coughing blood. Her Kerenzikov had been pinned at maximum so long it had stopped meaning anything. She had a gun in each hand and no targets worth either of them, and when the nearest drone crossed the last line she'd drawn in her head, she said it out loud, quietly, to no one. It's over. Then the sky went white and everything fell down. My implant had come online. The panel called it a Militech Chapter 6 prototype core, incomplete, a piece of neurobiology built to host and steer an artificial intelligence, now wired straight into my nerves and paid for with 200 science points. I closed my eyes on the table and opened them somewhere with no gravity and no up. Cyberspace. People rendered as loose knots of data, the tall walls of the domains, and beyond all of it, low on the horizon of that place, a trembling wave of red and black that made every living mind near it feel like an ant on a rail line. The black wall. It reached for me the second it noticed me, and it did not attack so much as offer. It whispered that I could be immortal, that I could be everything, and it started very gently to unstitch me at the edges. Then the panel put up one line, Heart of Evolution, interference detected, removing, and the whispering stopped, and I was just a man looking at a wall, not a worshipper, not a snack, something closer to an engineer standing in front of a reactor he happened to understand. I looked at the black wall the way I'd once looked at the sun, with respect and without surrender, and before I disconnected, I reached in and tore a piece of it loose and carried it back out with me. On the way, I understood something no textbook in this world would admit. When people die, their data drifts into that wall. The black wall isn't only a barrier, it's a graveyard, and the dead are learning to think. What I brought back, I turned into a weapon on the spot. I ripped the densest fragments I'd stolen and uploaded them into the enemy as puppets. Data packed thousands of times heavier than anything their cyberware was built to swallow. 50-odd systems choked at once. The drones dropped out of the sky. The soldiers' cyberware fell below 1/10 of its function, which for a person laced with chrome feels a great deal like every disease at once, and the whole squad froze mid-motion, or sat down hard, or bent over and was sick in the sand. I hacked their cyberware, I told Ace, and I could hear how strange my own voice sounded. Everyone's. She looked at the frozen battlefield, then at me, and grinned, and went to work. The panel gave me a unique puppet for it, Blackwall information blocking, and 3,000 science points, a number so far past anything I'd earned that I read it twice. The boundary finished its crossing and dropped us quietly into the Pacifica domain, where the calls were free and the ghosts were somebody else's problem. Sergey, watching my vitals from a city away, gave his verdict in the flat voice of a man revising his whole understanding of what a person could be. This wasn't just a super Sandevistan with no ceiling. I had sunk all the way down into cyberspace, to the bottom where the wall lives, and I had climbed back out awake and unbroken and, he said, apparently unbothered. Edge runners who touch that place come back as something that has to be put down. I came back like I'd stepped out onto my own porch. He gave me a name for it, half in awe and half in warning. The Abyss Walker. Then the adrenaline let go and I came apart at the seams, groggy, my body venting heat like a cooler that had given up, and I understood the bill. The Abyss hadn't been free. Whatever short handful of time I'd had left, I'd just spent a piece of it to survive the afternoon. Worth it. I was still the kind of broke where survival goes on a credit card, and I fully intended to keep swiping. We loaded the loot into the stolen behemoth, which had the great virtue of carrying no tracker, and then the rain came and did our cleanup for us. Militech would need hours just to find the trail again. There was no radio, so Ace demanded a song, and I gave her the reggae one. Something about letting a certain Jamaican have himself a blast, and somewhere in the second verse I fell asleep. In the space behind my eyes, an old wheel turned slowly. A lantern hung on nothing, both of them covered in characters older than any language I knew. Unstable energy about to erupt, said the panel, and the world changed channels again. Behind us, we left a mess nobody could read correctly, which was the whole idea. Militech beat the arriving Kang Tao team to the wreck and found a scene that made no sense. 64 of their own men logged off the network at the same instant, which is not a thing that happens. The report climbed, the way strange reports do, until it landed on the desk of a top net agent out of Washington who worked under the name Nightingale, and she saw what the analysts had missed. Fragments of Blackwall data scattered through the ruins like ash. She had been past that wall herself. She knew what it cost. She quietly erased every trace of it from the Netwatch record, told no one, and decided that whatever had walked out of the abyss in the Atlanta desert was hers to find. So that's one more person, in a nicer office than anyone I'd met so far, who now knew I existed. I just didn't know it yet. I woke up back in Queens, and the panel did its housekeeping. It bound the cyberware into this timeline, the Chapter 6 core, the neural link, the eye, all of it now physically part of me here too, paid for out of my science points, and it told me, in its bloodless way, that the thing Kang Tao had labeled reality distortion was in fact a next-generation Sandevistan, and that my meddling had just fast-tracked its invention by years. The rules of moving mass between worlds firmed up. 1 science point buys 1 gram. The chrome that had replaced my dying spine came with me, which meant the paralysis sentence was commuted. The catch was heat. A Sandevistan runs hot, and this one had no ceiling, and my frail body was already 1/10 of a degree warmer than it should be. If I didn't build myself a limiter, I wouldn't be paralyzed. I'd cook, like a fireball with a mortgage. That was tomorrow's problem. Today's problem was standing on the sidewalk outside my building, spray painting insults on the wall and threatening my landlord, and today's problem got solved by a blind man in a good suit. He came up the street with a cane and round dark glasses and a document bag, and he made 3 hard men leave with nothing but a quiet, precise legal threat, the kind delivered by someone who has clearly memorized which specific laws you are currently breaking. Then he turned toward me, unerringly, for a blind man. "I'm here to help you," said Ethan Blackwood, who I happened to know moonlighted as the devil of Hell's Kitchen. Ethan, it turned out, was a fellow patient, blinded by chemicals as a boy, every other sense turned up past the red line to compensate, a lawyer in the daylight, and something with horns after dark. He had a case for me. He was suing Kate's Discard Logistics, the outfit whose truck had flipped and put the original Kale in a coma, except every witness had either been frightened silent or turned up dead, and Ethan himself had been blinded years back by the same company's convenient negligence. I connected the dots the way you connect dots you've read the answer key for, Union Allied Construction, and behind it Marcus Thorne, the Kingpin, wanted Hell's Kitchen scrubbed clean and cheap so he could build something profitable on the bones of it. I told Ethan I'd testify, then I steered him off the truck and onto the thing that actually mattered to a man with my life expectancy, the eviction. First things first, I'd like to keep the roof over my mother before I sue anyone. At dinner, I learned the shape of this family. My father had been a cook who became a trucker and then died on an overtime shift while his son lay in a coma, which is the kind of story this world mass produces. When the TV mentioned a nuclear plant leak and a plan to pour the runoff into the sea, the old nuclear engineer in me stood up and called the anchor a beast before I could stop him, and my mother scolded me for cursing. She wouldn't tell me how much the family owed. She thought I was dying, and she wanted my last days to be light. So I didn't push. I just filed it under things I was going to fix whether she liked it or not. Walking Ethan out, I met the neighborhood. The landlord, Mr. Jensen, an immigrant from Latveria, which got the expected joke out of my system about the homeland of a certain doctor who rented only to people with clean records, and I learned about the toothpick murders. 3 heads of neighborhood associations, all dead, all ruled accidents, all of them choked on a toothpick driven into the throat with impossible precision. Kingpin's work, everyone knew, and no one could prove. Ethan warned me the fight was lethal. I told him the truth, which is that fear and regret had woken me up in this life, but I didn't want them driving. I wanted the wheel in kinder hands than that. The pedestrian light turned green. Come on, I said. It's on. So I organized. I won over Jensen, who had a temper and an estranged gangster son and a soft spot he pretended not to have, and I pitched the whole building, me as president of a proper homeowners association, Ethan as free counsel, and numbers C, enough residents standing together to make the police actually respond and to make hurting us more expensive than leaving us alone. It's basic game theory. You don't beat a predator by being noble. You beat it by raising its costs until you're not worth the trouble. Jensen rallied the residents, 8 households, 26 people, every one of them an immigrant, a loud, broad-shouldered woman named Sophia and her Latino husband Marcos chief among them, and we registered the association and a little security and services company to go with it. Technology changes lives, I told them. I believed it too. I just hadn't told them which technology, because the real muscle of the plan wasn't the paperwork. It was the cameras. My net running, garbage as my gear was, still put me a full universe ahead of anyone in 2011, and I meant to wire this neighborhood into a surveillance net that answered only to me. I hired 2 bodyguards to be the human face of it, Samuel Vance, 32, black, quiet, with a young son at home, and Marcos Ruiz, 40, Latino, loud enough for both of them, and I fixed everyone's wiring and mounted the cameras for free. To power all of it off the books I needed into a sleepy 2011 substation, so I cracked the packets off a comms tower, found a senior engineer, borrowed his phone long enough to learn the substation's whole routine, and went to pay it a visit. There was a girl already there, fumbling at the control panel like she had no idea what she was doing, and when she saw me she tripped over her own feet and bolted. I caught her before she made the fence, and she immediately started lying, which I respect as a craft. She gave me a fake name, then a worse fake name, and I countered with one of my own, Alex Pizza Palace, which I want on record as a joke I committed to fully. Her real name was Lyra, and in a few years the world would know her as something that could level a building with her hands, but tonight she was just a broke hacktivist off a truth and justice forum who'd bitten off a substation she couldn't chew, so I hired her. No salary, free skills, and a job that mattered, which for a certain kind of person is a better offer than money. Then I showed her how it's actually done. I spoofed the engineer's text to the guard, walked in the front like an electrician who belonged there, planted a back door and a self-spreading Trojan across the power stations, and left without leaving a single frame on any camera. The guard was still sweating over a text message that had never technically existed. Lyra looked at me like I'd performed a miracle. Close enough. By morning, the neighborhood had eyes. 3 cameras. Plus facial recognition I dragged back from 2077 that could lock a stranger in about 2 seconds, all of it running on power I now quietly owned. Quiet Samuel asked me what the point of all of it was, and I told him, cameras make evidence the police can't wave away, and evidence and fists work better together than either one alone. Samuel had a story like a lot of good men here, orphaned, an alcoholic father who used his hands wrong, a son named Kai he was trying to be better for, an old career as a street fighter he was busy atoning for. Kingpin's people had tried to recruit him once, he'd said no. I liked him more every hour. Then somebody kicked in the door for a spot of what the local kids called zero-yuan shopping, and the neighborhood got to test its new spine. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, so the building was mostly empty, and the defense came down to Samuel and Marcos holding the entry with folding chairs and an umbrella and a flower pot, Jensen swinging in behind them, a Russian grandmother with an iron pot doing more damage than any of us. A dreadlocked crew boss named Rex Dixon put a pistol on Samuel, and then a figure in black dropped out of nowhere and kicked the man out of the air, folding him in half, and I finished the thought with a brick. The devil vanished the way he does. Wait for our men to tie you up, I told the rest, and they did, because the fight had already left them. Ethan strolled back in a minute later, as if he'd been in the bathroom the whole time. Normally the NYPD would rule a thing like this a gang fight, both sides guilty, everybody back on the street by dinner. But I had footage, and I had prisoners, and I had, thanks to me steering the neighborhood's cameras like a puppeteer, bonus recordings of 2 other robberies from public feeds I now controlled. Ethan clocked the camera moving on its own and said nothing, which is the polite thing your friends do when they've noticed you're a little bit terrifying. What I wanted out of it wasn't just arrests. I wanted the masked man publicly cleared, because a city that treats mutual defense as a crime is a city training its people to wait for a savior, and I am against saviors on principle. Lyra attached herself to me somewhere in all this and asked if she could just, live at my place. Boss, she said, you were so cool. We took it to the police, where the precinct captain, a soft, cowardly man named Arthur Croft who owed his chair to a Kingpin-sponsored councilman, wanted to bury the whole thing under the rug he clearly kept for exactly this. Then a different cop walked past, upright, rigid, allergic to nonsense, the kind of officer who genuinely believes in the system he serves, and I flagged him down before Croft could stop me. Captain Thomas Hayes. Home invasion, illegal firearm, 20-plus residents including women and children, all of it on a drive in my pocket. He bit. He reviewed the footage, watched Rex swagger and threaten the officers' families and brag about a boss he couldn't actually name, and arrested him on the spot. Rex ran. Stacy put him down with one clean, non-lethal shot, a piece of American Aikido, and I recorded every frame of that too. Then Stacy did something more useful than the arrest. He dangled a city contract, a neighborhood security bid, in front of a company he assumed I didn't have yet. Ethan had already filed the paperwork and warned me straight that the higher my profile climbed, the sooner the toothpick killer would come for me. Good, I thought. Let him come to the man with all the cameras. As your lawyer, Ethan said, I'll stand beside you. Somewhere in a much cleaner part of the city, Marcus Thorne was looking at me as a line item. Union Allied Construction was a legitimate builder on paper and a laundry for drugs and guns, and worse underneath, riding the subprime wreckage to buy Hell's Kitchen block by block, and my little association plus my little security company plus my quietly rigged cameras were doing the one thing a man like Thorne cannot tolerate, making his cheap intimidation expensive, and nosing toward the pension fund he'd been embezzling. Bennett laid it all out for him. Thorne gave the order in the calm voice of a man ordering lunch. Kill the boy and make it a show, frame it through Kate Waste disposal, hit the first neighbor who joined the association, and reach for the boy's mother through his contact in Chinatown. Quick and ruthless. He sent Crosshair. I fought back the way I fight, which is with narrative. Marcos had a golden voice and a talent for a crowd, so I put him on the street with edited clips. The thug swaggering, the thug bleeding, the thug shot fleeing at the feet of the NYPD. All of it watermarked with the name of my new company, Bloom Security, which I'd borrowed from a video game about a city that watches itself. We won the police contract by undercutting everyone because my research and development costs were zero. I was importing the future wholesale. The association grew, the dues came in, the dues became loans, the loans became more association, a wheel that turned the right way for once. And in the middle of the spreadsheet, there was Marcos's daughter Chloe telling me she wanted to make the world a little better, and Samuel hauling gear up the stairs with his ruined nice smile, and I let myself feel, briefly, like the good version of what I was building. Lyra ran the online front, and when the posts got deleted, she spun up botnets to repost them 1,000-fold, and when a troll started slurring Samuel, she asked if she could take the guy's whole life apart. Not yet, I told her. Flame him, but leave the back doors alone. I wanted to see how their moderation moved first. The Trojan kept spreading until something like 70% of Manhattan's grid was quietly under my eye. Public and private cameras fused into one picture for 5 kilometers in every direction, and the neighborhood's petty thieves started finding other neighborhoods. Ethan, who had spent his life imagining only the next dark thing, admitted he'd caught himself imagining a future instead. My own private plan was smaller and more selfish. Enroll at Empire State University and study cell biology because the clock in my chest was still running and I intended to argue with it. Then Ethan's head snapped up, a hand 100 meters out, rising with a steel toothpick balanced on it, and he shoved me sideways as the window beside my skull turned to snow. The next 90 seconds rearranged my understanding of danger. Crosshair is, on paper, just a man. No chrome, no powers. He simply does not miss, ever, with anything, and in a world without Kerenzakovs that is its own kind of god. His first throw would have gone through my eye. Ethan took it in the chest to shield me, and only survived because the toothpick had spent most of itself punching through the glass first. Samuel and Lyra's car went over in the chaos, and Samuel came up with a toothpick buried in his throat, drowning on himself, and Lyra had to hold his eyes and keep him breathing. Think about your son. You're going to be a hero. Stay with me, while the light went thin in them. I unlocked my Sandevistan's limiter to 50% and became, for a frail dying boy, almost fast enough. I slapped toothpicks out of the air and off my own arms while my body burned, brain and spine climbing to 39 degrees, the chrome doing so little for a frame this weak that all I really felt was the old familiar pain of working an overtime shift my body couldn't afford. Ethan caught what I couldn't. I worked the power grid and the traffic lights like piano keys, clearing one road, choking another, herding the whole street toward a trap I was building out of heavy vehicles and green lights. And then I did the last thing Crosshair would expect from a cornered kid. I planted my feet in the open, in the middle of the street, and faked reaching for a gun, and invited the man who never misses to draw first. He was out of toothpicks. He went for a pistol. Kingpin had wanted an execution in the street, with witnesses. He was about to get one, just not the one he ordered. Here was the trap. I told Crosshair, with my body language, that the red light was the signal. When it turned, we'd both draw. I watched him read it. I watched him believe it, because a man who never misses has never once had to consider that the game itself might be rigged. The light went red, his hand moved. My hand came up, and instead of a gun, I gave him a single raised middle finger. Then a Union Allied dump truck, one I'd been feeding green lights through 5 straight intersections so it physically could not stop in time, came through the cross street and folded his van into the pavement like a letter into an envelope. "Dump truck iaijutsu," I told the wreckage. "You idiot." The panel, which has a sense of humor, logged it as a unique technique and paid me 1,000 points for it. There is a particular justice in Crosshair being crushed under tons of overloaded mud by a truck belonging to his own boss, speeding and overweight because Kingpin underpays his drivers and underpaid drivers overload to eat. The man's dying driver, pinned in the cab, coughed up something more useful than an apology. The boss has a plan, he heard him say it. And Ethan went still, and I went cold, because in the same breath I remembered that Jensen had a son, and my cameras had quietly logged one Lars Hansine Jensen walking into the building 10 minutes ago. I told Ethan to run, "Mr. Jensen, go, now," and I threw out an all-hands call to the association, and I prayed I was fast enough for once. Lars had come home to persuade his father the way gangsters persuade, sell to Union Allied, or else. On the wall hung the old revolver, the one Jensen had once killed a man with, the killing that sent him to prison and sent Lars into a gang in the first place. Lars took it down. He blamed his father for his mother's death, screamed it, aimed it, and Jensen, cold as a headstone, told him to shoot if he had the nerve, but know that the house would go to that boy upstairs before it ever went to him. Lars fired. At the exact instant he fired, the desk lamp beside him detonated because I'd reached the room the only way I could, through the wiring, and a heating pipe blew out behind it in a gout of scald and spark. His shot went wide and only grazed his father's thigh. The blast took half of Lars's face, and Lars, it turned out, had come preloaded on the blue courage pills his gang handed out, a hallucinogen that turns fear into something with teeth, and the bad trip closed over him, and before anyone could reach him, he turned the old revolver on himself. There are deaths you write down plainly and move past. That was one. The aftermath sorted itself the way things do when you own the cameras. Crosshair's face on my footage reopened every toothpick murder the NYPD had filed under bad luck, and this time they were ruled what they always were, organized crime, with a name everyone thought and no one printed. Samuel lived, the toothpick in his throat, and a cab driver Lyra had flagged, and a lot of luck left him hoarse for the rest of his life and breathing, which was the trade I'd have made. Jensen lived, thigh and face, and Stacy tied his old case to the Blackstreet gang and started the machinery of compensation. His whole story came out then. A wife murdered while he was out working, tenants too frightened to testify, a revenge that cost him prison and cost his son a father, and a son the gang was happy to raise into a weapon. Bad guys win, he told me afterward, only when the good ones decide to do nothing. My mother put her hand on my face that night and said, "You've grown up," and I let her believe it was only that. I told her about the home I was going to build us, a real one, with a garden on the roof where everyone could sit, and I told her to quit the job in Chinatown. Then Kingpin's messenger knocked on the door. The messenger came with a truce in his mouth. I sent back a counter. I would buy the land back at cost, plus 10%, and Thorne would never build in my neighborhood again, and by the way, he'd only ever been lucky, not good. While the man was still absorbing that, a Union Allied dump truck, timed to the second off my grid, rammed Kingpin's own limousine across town, empty of casualties, full of message. It said everything his toothpicks had said back to him in his own handwriting, and underneath it said the thing that actually moves a man like Thorne. The other side knows who you are, and where your car is, and when. He backed down, told Bennett to bury the messenger, and called it, in public, a small strategy adjustment. In private, it was the first time in years someone had made Marcus Thorne flinch, and we both knew it. The panel flickered, unstable energy about to erupt, and the channel changed. Back in the Badlands, Ace was humming the reggae song again, which she'd caught off me like a cold. Between us and Night City stood a 6-meter border wall, a leftover of the unification war that split the corporate north from the NUSA south, and it was Militex to guard. Face scans, vehicle scans, drones overhead, an orbital response one bad decision away. On the radio, the whole Atlanta mess was being pinned on Kang Tao, Chen and Lee, both conveniently dead, and Militech's confusion about the rest was a gift I hadn't paid for. Then the behemoth broke down, because of course it did, and dumped us in the last town before the line. Drywater Creek was a dead oil town with fewer than 30 people in it, and a sheriff named Andrew Jones who wore a silver shotgun and used to be special forces. I complimented his service until he softened, played an investigator named I'm Nothing If Not Consistent, Alex Pizza Palace, and fished until he handed me two names, a nomad fixer called Jesse Evans and a mechanic named Leo who took one look at the behemoth, decided not to ask about the missing cargo box, and promised 2 hours. Reaching Evans meant climbing the comms tower, and closing him meant the single most satisfying negotiation of my life. He refused me flat. So I anchored him. I started talking, at length, about what 10,000 euros actually buys a nomad tribe in medicine and fuel, and then, every time he stalled or postured, I dropped my offer. 150,000. He stalled. Lower. He blustered. Lower. Every silence cost him money, and watching a fixer realize that the price only moves down when he wastes your time is like watching a man try to swim up a waterfall. By the end, he was begging to take my money, and he'd let slip that customs had been frozen 3 months and there was an undeclared batch moving. I'm your client now, I told him gently. The plan sharpened over a 3-hour wait in a bar with Ace. The behemoth would get us caught at the checkpoint 99 times out of 100, so we'd ditch it for something nomad and forgettable and move the prototype smart weapons across ourselves. The nomads delivered a beat-up Thornton Galina, a Viper, smuggle-modified, ugly in the way that keeps you alive, and an intel chip and a client to ride with, a Night City man named Lucas Cruz, moving a batch that had almost certainly fallen off a hijacked Arasaka truck. Lucas turned out to be a gentle giant with a bun of dark hair and Haywood written all over him, the kind of big man who's careful with his hands because he learned early how much they can break. Because Ace's whole personality leaks the second she talks, she cannot hide that she'd knife you for 200 euros. I sent her in to handle him, Haywood to Haywood, and the two of them hit it off like family. We loaded the insured Arasaka box, and just like that, the team had a shape. 2 who hit, in Ace and Lucas, and 1 who thinks, in me, disassembling my sniper into the trunk. Lucas hid the cargo and the smart weapons in the Viper's false floor, and we rolled up on a border crossing that had gotten religion since Atlanta. Helicopters, drones, behemoths, a basilisk tank hovering over the whole thing like a bad mood. I filed the smuggling paperwork, greased it with a bribe, and each of us carried 1 smart shotgun through openly for self-defense, which put 4 of the things in 1 small car and a very thin smile on my face. At the customs window, I overpaid on purpose, 5,000 where 1,000 was the going rate, and watch the officer relax and then, right on cue, start planning how to sell the tip to somebody because he had no nomad family behind him, and a man with no family is a man who eats his own guests. Welcome to Night City, he said. I told Lucas we'd be ambushed the moment we cleared the gate, that customs tips Militech's freelancers for a cut, and Lucas, who had genuinely just wanted to move a box and go home, said the truest thing anyone said all week. I didn't come here to fight a war. The war did not care. 4 Militech Ragnars and something like 10 agents came off the checkpoint's leash the second we cleared it, and I floored the Viper toward the Biotechnica greenhouses while Ace and Lucas went to work, Lucas's pistol barking, Ace taking a head off at speed. And then it stopped being a 2-body problem because Arasaka drones dropped in and shoved Militech back, and then turned and came for us too, which is when I understood the shape of the thing. Arasaka didn't want the lizard in the box. Arasaka wanted us. I couldn't brute force my way through Militech's ICE, not with the gear I had, so I split myself. Cyber Eyes ran the shotgun's targeting while my meat eyes drove, the panel obligingly deleting the vertigo of seeing 2 things at once, and I threaded the Viper straight down the throat of a triangle with Militech on one side, Arasaka drones on another, and that basilisk sliding in ahead to close the third. Both corporate forces issued their little legal disclaimers to each other, the polite throat clearing that says we are about to shoot and it is not our fault, and I drove into the exact center of the 2 of them, Ace emptying the 8-star shot at its top rate, 112 high-explosive smart rounds walking across both armies while I locked the targets that mattered. Then I stopped shooting and let them do the rest to each other. When the smoke cleared, the survivors on both sides had reached the same comforting, wrong conclusion. Kang Tao. Always Kang Tao. Morning found us in a Badlands ruin, alive, with the radio playing one of those NCPD-rigged Dead Man's lotteries where the house is the coroner. Ace paid Lucas his 5,000 with great ceremony, and I quietly wired the money back to Lucas out of my own account behind her back because a running gag is a gift you give your friends. Lucas was starting to notice that we were awfully comfortable for nomads, awfully Night City. Then we opened the box. It was an iguana. A live one, a species of lesser Antillean lizard that had been extinct for years, which in this world is not a pet, it's a winning lottery ticket with a tail. I'd struck gold. I explained my read on the situation, that Arasaka was fixated on Militech to the point of tunnel vision, Atlanta, and a moon catapult scandal I knew was coming, and that the smart move was to sell the lizard to a Haywood fixer everyone called the priest and let the giants keep swinging at each other. Lucas summed up the whole city in one line. They're all unscrupulous merchants. Then he looked out at the neon coming up over the wasteland and said the other thing everyone says here eventually, the city's real anthem. Night City, you son of a bitch. Night City proper is 7 million people and no referee, and it welcomed us the way it welcomes everyone, which is not at all. Ace sang her little hymn to Kenji Tanaka. I faded out mid-sentence, lips going white, another attack coming due, and when a Valentino's crew and a 6th Street crew squared up in the street beside us, Ace defused it without firing a shot, just flashed them the full inventory of combat cyberware wired into her body until the punks decided they'd rather be somewhere else. Cyber psycho, they whispered, backing away. It's the most useful word in the city. It means please don't. At Sergei's I found out the Sandevistan was trying to finish what the radiation had started. My lungs had failed, acute, ugly, oxygen spiking and crashing, while a body this weak tried to keep up with a Sandevistan built for a soldier twice my size. Sergei put me on a ventilator and told me the thing no one wants to hear from the one honest man they know. Willpower doesn't beat biology, and the chrome keeping me fast is the chrome killing me. Meanwhile, in the other world, Ethan had done me a quiet favor and brought a geneticist to look at my breakdown, Professor Leonard Wells, who took one look at the way my cells were coming apart and fell in love, professionally, and invited me into his research group because spider DNA and now lizard DNA might be exactly the key to restoring cellular vitality, and his work was stuck at a wall he couldn't climb. I told Sergei it was too early to retire and bought myself a living lung off more technologies, a synthetic lobe, an accessory heart, a blood pump. If the body was going to be a war, I'd at least resupply it. The numbers behind the chrome are brutal and honest. Every implant is gated by your body and your reflexes, and the scale runs to 20. Ace sat at 16 and up. I sat at body 1, reflex 3, which is the whole reason a top-tier Sandevistan does so little for me. I'm a paper cup somebody strapped a jet engine to. My intelligence ran off the top of the same scale, so far past 20 that I wrote 12 on the form just to look human. Moore flew the lung in by Aerodyne, express fee and all, and Sergei patched the Sandevistan's limiter and bolted on a cyberdeck, and while he was in there he found something that made both of us quiet. The Sandevistan had a built-in bridge port for a cyberdeck. Kid, he said slowly. Was this thing ever really meant to be a Sandevistan at all? It wasn't. The Chapter 6 core was a tool for pouring an artificial mind into a human nervous system to run hacks no deck could handle alone, and someone at Militech had dressed it up as a speed booster because that was the part they understood. I loaded it with a Militech parallel line deck and its pre-packed puppets, and I kept the Blackwall trick holstered because using it twice near Netwatch was a good way to get a nightingale knocking. A pair of small-time thieves tried to rob me on the way out. Ace crushed one man's hand and Lucas pointed a finger and shouted bang, and they wet themselves and left, which is the whole gag, and it never gets old. Then I met the priest, a Valentino's elder, Haywood's top fixer, the kind of godfather who blesses you and prices you in the same breath, and asked him for a clean fake identity to enroll at Arasaka Academy because I had knowledge gaps to fill and a license to earn, and he agreed in exchange for a small job. Housing in 2076 is a cruelty with a lease. 99% of people will never own a home. Nightcorp owns the rentals, and even the washing machine in your kitchen is rented and takes coins. Ace picked out a place in the H10 mega building, her dream flat, and reality charged her $4,000 a month in creeping fees for the privilege of owning none of it, right down to the vending machine in the living room playing a mayoral ad at her while a fire alarm scrolled across the TV. She looked genuinely heartbroken. The company owns everything, I told her. That's not a bug. That's the product. Arasaka Academy is the #1 school in the world, and also a place with a suicide rate they file under enrichment, where a campus shooting is a Tuesday and a law degree costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. I walked in as Alex Pizza Palace and sat for the entrance exam. It opened with a question so stupid I had to read it twice. Is the Sandevistan a form of ancient magic? And then got real, bioelectrics and CHOOH2 fuel chemistry, and I aced all of it on 2 lifetimes and a Sergei-shaped crash course. The psychological section asked if I'd like to join Arasaka. No. Would I live as a loyal contract employee? And I gave them my actual philosophy, which is that you play every side and belong to none, because the only law that never changes is the wall between the classes, and I signed the answer. In effect, only an idiot would take that job. That answer traveled further than I meant it to. In an Arasaka R&D meeting, a stressed manager named Tanaka was trying to explain the border battle. His own team and Militechs ambushed by smugglers who crippled 40-odd people and a pile of drones and simply drove away, and the numbers wouldn't line up no matter how much they blamed the 8-star shot. A recruiter flagged a promising exam file, perfect scores, freakishly stable brainwaves, a walk-in named Alex Pizza Palace. The report quoted my psych answer back verbatim. Only an idiot would do this job. Tanaka read it, decided I was a street thug with a good memory, and moved on. Meanwhile, the school gave its students a 7-day holiday, which is the kind of mercy Arasaka hands out right before it takes something bigger. I deleted the Saburo worship course from my schedule on principle the man was a war criminal, and I don't take ideology from war criminals, and went to do the priest's job, which was to push back on the 6th Street gang muscling into Valentino's turf. 3 of their soldiers with junk guns and my little heating puppet cooked their cyberware until they sat down. Don't kill that one, I said of the last. I need the practice. Then I found out why the priest actually cared. The 6th Street crew had set up a boundary they called a shooting range, and a girl walking past had caught a stray round and died, and because it happened inside their claimed jurisdiction, the NCPD filed it under Not My Problem, and the girl's mother had sold everything she owned to hire the priest for justice she'd never otherwise afford. At Empire State University, the 2011 one, the air smelled like leaded gas, and the science was, honestly, better than Arasaka's. Real instead of designed. Ethan admitted, walking me in, that he wasn't strictly blind, and asked me the question he'd been holding. I could have solved all of Hell's Kitchen myself, quietly, like a superhero. Why hadn't I? So I told him my creed. People have to stand up, not kneel and wait for a savior, because a savior is just a landlord with better press. Money is only a tool for dividing labor, and the people who hold the future owe it to the people who do the work. He went quiet in the way of a man hearing his dead father argue back. Then I met Professor Leonard Wells, blonde, balding, one arm ending at the shoulder, in a lab full of geckos. Wells wanted to splice reptile regeneration into human beings, and he was stuck on a DNA decay algorithm inherited from a dead colleague named Arthur Reed, and Sterling was circling, offering the best resources in the world in exchange for turning the work into weapons, which Wells would not do because he'd already lost an arm to the difference between medicine and a weapon. I read his error in about a minute. The decay rate was wrong, and I had 2 lifetimes of nuclear physics that said so, and I made him an offer no one else could. A hard guarantee against weaponization, full control kept in his hands, and the exact Lesser Antillean iguana DNA he needed in days, because I happened to have the lizard in a box in another universe. He took the deal. I just bought myself a cure to work toward and a Nobel laureate to work with, and it cost me a smuggled reptile. Back on the Night City side, I set up Bloom Corporation in Jensen's old office with Lyra as its director, and the panel formalized it. My first research institute, her expertise in information and network security, and an unlocked project I grabbed without hesitation, CTOS, the city controlling operating system from a game about exactly this. I handed Lyra a 2077 chip design that was pure witchcraft in 2011, made Marcos the president's right hand, and started sketching the job I was really building toward, the one I'd privately named the Great Robbery of the Biological Era, lifting Biotechnica's DNA cutting instrument off an orbital station, leveraging a Night City-born executive, exposing their human experiments, and using Arasaka's obsession to launder the whole thing clean. It needed a data barrier to hide my tracks, which is a thing only the Abyss could give me. Everything I did pointed back to that wall, but before any of that, the priest passed along a smaller errand of the heart. The grieving mother from the shooting range killing wanted to thank us in person at a little bar called El Coyote Cojo, which happened to be run by Lucas's mother. The dead girl had a name. Zara, 22, one internship away from an Arasaka job, raised on 14 years of a single mother's loans, and the mother was homeless now, burning incense for a daughter a €2 bullet had erased. Ace, who would knife a man for €200 without blinking, sat with that story and could not speak. Zara's mother, Isabella, finished the story herself, the whole small life of it, and then pressed something into my hand as thanks. Zara's watch, a mechanical one the girl had taught herself to repair, still ticking. Then she left, and Lucas's mother wept behind the bar, and I sat there thinking about how this city takes the most ordinary wish a person can have, a daughter, a job, a Tuesday, and burns it for fuel. And that was the exact moment the 6th Street gang shot up El Coyote Cojo, and Isabella died in the street outside, a mother following her daughter down the same €2 road, and something in me that had been doing arithmetic all week stopped. The bar fight was short and total. Ace had her subdermal armor and Lucas had his nerve. 6 shooters came with 2 Ajax rifles, and I painted every one of them. Ace went up and over on her Kerenzikov, dropped them clean, put a grenade through the air like a free throw. 2 ran, and I reached into the grid and folded their cars around them and cooked the runner's cyberware until it quit. And in the wreckage of it, the first real piece of my plan clicked into place, cold and clear. A gang war is just a network diagram that bleeds. Every dealer, every runner, every buyer is a node. We're going to take a few pieces of meat off the 6th Street gang, I said, and I meant the whole body eventually. The priest filled in the gang for me. 4th Corporate War veterans, legalized in one district, overreached into Santo Domingo, at war with the Valentinos, and thanked us for Zara, and I told him the truth to close the distance. I was dying, 300,000 in more lungs and hearts, flat broke behind it. He gave me the next intel for free, which is how you know a fixer has decided you're worth more alive than build. 2 chips. One was a cautious arms dealer named Gabrielle, who ran a place called the Rama Armory off her own clean citizen name. The other was a factory middleman. My plan around them was simple to say and enormous to do. Rob the 6th Street gang so thoroughly that every supplier and every buyer in their web needed my say-so to breathe. Dress it up as 3 tough guys forcing the gang to bend the knee to the Valentinos so the priest got the credit, and quietly underneath build my data barrier out of the wreckage. Lucas was in. Ace was in. First stop, Gabrielle. Sergei had the iguana and was already building a biological model off it, paid out of Ace's cut, while we toured Santo Domingo, the sewage, the lake of garbage behind a failing dam, and Arroyo, the 6th Street headquarters, built around an old nuclear plant. I looked at that plant a beat too long. You could turn any reactor into a bomb, I told Lucas. It's literally my specialty. Then I told him I wouldn't, because there's a line between the man who ends things and the man who eats the world, and I intend to stay on the correct side of it. On the corner, a fresh 6th Street recruit was shaking down a street vendor, 800 euros and climbing, and nobody looked up, which is the whole tragedy of a gang that started by promising to protect the very people it now feeds on. Gabrielle ran the Rama Armory like a woman who'd survived by being careful, intranet only, nothing exposed to the wider net, 4 MK26 turrets covering the room. Careful is a good strategy against everyone except the one guy who read your firewall's manual in a past life. Her ICE was outdated Militech Civil, crackable in under a second, and there's always a delay between an alarm tripping and the turrets waking, so I timed the whole thing to that gap. Ace broke the door. I froze the turrets mid-alarm, and then I swung all 4 of them around to point at Gabrielle herself. This is a warning, I said, and set them to self-destruct, and drew a line across her table with one finger. The Rama Armory is closed. She looked at my eyes doing 4 things at once. A multitasking cyber lunatic who also, unforgivably, had the skills to back it up and decided she believed me. Her ledger, it turned out, belonged to a basically ethical dealer, and her chat logs belonged to a woman being used. A 6th Street man named Omar Sharif had been running smuggling under her clean citizen name, hiding behind a wartime production loophole, and the logs coughed up the prize. A big shipment crossing the border tomorrow, classified military gear, which meant a convoy, which meant the Badlands. I tested the Yinglong SMG and told the others to sleep. The convoy was 5 Columbus trucks and a crew of 6th Street veterans with stars and stripes patches, and a man they called the captain. We came up alongside in the Viper. I blew the tires off the lead with the smart SMG, the grenades did the middle, and 30 minutes later, the 6th Street gang was scattered across the sand, and I had personally fired exactly once. I spared the last recruit, a kid buying vaccines for his family, with the same message I keep on a loop. Tell your boss this road is closed. The loot was better than the intel promised. Weapons? Yes. And one beautiful monstrosity. A modified Satara electromagnetic shotgun that fired homemade heavy rounds so brutal only a genuine cyber monster could hold it, which I handed to Lucas as a goal to grow into. And behind a false panel, packed careful and cold, cans of liquid medicine. The route chip told the rest of the story, and it was uglier than smuggling. Stop 1, Drywater, where a Biotechnica rep loads the hidden medicine into the weapon crates. Stop 2, the Red Ochre Tribe. Stop 3, Arroyo. The 6th Street gang was running Militech guns, and tucked inside them, Biotechnica medicine, moving behind Militech's back to a nomad tribe, which meant there was a plague in Santo Domingo. Somebody very rich was working very hard to keep quiet. We drove out to the tribe to see it, and found frail people and children standing guard with junk launchers, a boy of maybe 15 holding a rusted igla like it was the last thing between his family and the dark. Ace introduced us the only way that lands out here, by letting them get a good look at the Satara. Then we went in to talk. The chieftain was a dying man named Marcus Reed, and the disease had a corporate name, Gamma Rabies, a bioweapon dressed as bad luck, and Biotechnica had priced the cure at 80,000 a can, doubled from 40 the moment the tribe got desperate enough to pay it. I read the shape of it instantly. They'd signed one of Biotechnica's human trial deals, which meant they'd been contractually barred from the very vaccine that would save them, so I sold them the medicine at half price, 200,000 for 6 cans, survival at a discount, on one condition: cut every tie to the 6th Street gang. Marcus took my hand in both of his and called me friend, and I felt the usual small guilt of a man doing a kind thing for a reason that isn't only kind. The tribe got under my crew's skin the way real people do. A girl named Priya asked Ace about her undercut, and Ace got flustered, actually flustered, over a haircut compliment from a kid. Lucas fell in with the 15-year-old Julian, handed him the stolen Ajax, and saw the whole tribe kitted out for free, and told the boy his own story, his first Valentino's run, a boss named Lucas cut down by Maelstrom, a teenage Lucas who avenged him and then walked away from the gang for his mother's sake because he wanted to do big things the honest way. Julian cried because it was the first kindness an outsider had ever shown him, and then he warned us about a 6th Street roadblock ahead and lent us the tribe's cars, which is what people do when you've earned it. Ace cornered me about the plan afterward, and I told her the truth because she'd earned that too. Free guns and half-price medicine would push Red Ochre to break with Biotechnica on their own. The money runs out, they come back for more, the company refuses, the refusal becomes a grudge, and a tribe with a grudge and a debt to me becomes mine without my ever asking. Making other people believe their interests line up with yours, I told her, is the entire trick of politics. Ace went quiet, then said, "You played me like this in Atlanta too, didn't you?" "No," I said. "I just saw, very early, that you were a person who'd put a knife in someone for 200 euros, and I built around that." She didn't argue. It wasn't wrong. We fenced the convoy weapons to the priest at 30% under market and split 110,000 each, and on the Marvel side the wheel kept turning. The Iguana model went to Wells, the Bloom security project cleared a third of its milestones and its first 300,000, and I sent 100 of it home against the family debt. Then Luna, Lucas's girlfriend, invited me for a tarot reading, which I'd have laughed off except I'd seen her Wheel of Fortune once already, spinning in cyberspace where only Ace is supposed to be able to see it. She turned the magician, then death, then the chariot. A fight, she said, life or death, and coming soon. Lucas, to lighten it, showed her the Rama Armory footage and accidentally exposed his own dazed moment of memory editing on camera and dragged me out before the reading could get any more accurate. Ace got her first mantis blade after that, just the one arm, since the second needs an organ surgery her body isn't ready for yet, and Lucas got his gold-cased pistol and the Satara with a limiter bolted back on so it wouldn't tear his arm off. The next name on the list was Miles Corbett, who ran the factory market, and to get into Santo Domingo quietly, we rode in with Dario, the soldier I'd spared on the convoy road, now bought and paid for in medicine for his sick mother. Somewhere across town, a 6th Street sergeant was screaming at the priest about a squad calling itself, among other things, Burger King. The reputation was arriving before we did. Gamma Rabies, it turns out, is a Biotechnica special built for Militech, spreads through fluids, kills inside a week, and a detail I filed away hard, sunlight fries the cyberware of anyone infected and blinds the ones running optical implants. I vaccinated the whole team out of the stolen can, which held 300 doses where the company sold 60. The vaccine itself priced 50 times over at $4 million a can, which is just class warfare with a needle. Then we rode into Santo Domingo behind Dario, who was really only there to buy his mother's medicine, and I faked a coughing fit at the right moment to wave off a nosy biker. Miles Corbett was smarter than Gabrielle, and he was smarter in the correct way. His fortress wasn't walls, it was relationships. So I didn't threaten his defenses, I threatened him, personally and specifically, and he did the pragmatic thing a relationship man does, which is fold and offer to be useful. He'd back whoever won, he said, just don't raise the rent. He gave up the two things I needed. First, that the 6th Street gang had bought themselves a cyber monster, with the surgical records to prove it sitting at a ripper dock down on the beach. Second, a channel to fence hot goods and pull corporate weapons. 40-60 split, and I shook his hand and installed a comms backdoor through the handshake because I am nothing if not thorough. Don't try to be clever, I told him. He'd already decided not to. The CTOS project broke through around then, traffic AI fully online, which meant I could now summon a dump truck out of the flow of the city on command and erase my own trail through cyberspace while I did it, untraceable. I stood there a second weighing whether to just lie low and protect what was left of my health. Then I went to the beach anyway, because the boss the 6th Street gang had bought was a name I recognized. The beach ripper dock had a red-haired woman and her son in for a checkup. Both of them stretched thin over Arasaka tuition, and I knew their faces on sight. Gloria and Mateo Ramos, a whole tragedy still waiting to happen. The kid clocked my chrome and said quietly, "So handsome," and I filed that away too. Then I pulled the surgical file I'd actually come for, and it was worse than Miles had let on. Rhys Owen. 2 meters of near-total military cyberware, a Sandevistan, 3 mantis blades, a projectile launcher, tactical compound eyes, the whole build overclocked to the edge of cyberpsychosis, a cyber monster in the most literal sense, and the 6th Street gang had bought him for one job. Kill my crew. The file said Rhys Owen was going in for a tune-up that very evening, 7 o'clock, which was now. The beach ripperdoc, who wanted no part of what was about to walk through his door, put himself under anesthesia to sleep through it, which is the most honest review of Rhys Owen I can offer. Retreat, I said. We didn't make it. He came in with his mentor, an old hand named Aaron Bell, and he was everything the file promised and one thing it couldn't. He read Dario's fear off the man's own hormones, smelled the spike like a shark, and opened fire before hello. I told Dario to run for the priest and threw everything I had at the problem. Ace's single mantis blade rang off his 3. Lucas's Satara actually dented the armor, which nothing should. I pulled dump trucks out of the CTOS grid and threw the whole city at him, and my Yinglong laid down enough static to pop a small EMP, and for one held breath, Rhys Owen stuttered, long enough just to run. He killed a 6th Street veteran on his way out the door, casually, the way you swat something, and across the room Mateo Ramos and his mother came within a hair of dying just for being in it. We did not beat him. Understand that. We escaped him, which against a thing like that is its own kind of victory, and it still cost more than I wanted to pay. It cost Lucas his hand. One of those blades took it clean at the wrist, and the artery was already counting him down. 3 minutes maybe, before Haywood lost its gentlest giant on a beach that didn't deserve him. I wrenched the throttle with one hand and worked on him with the other, clamped the bleed with a clotting agent, hit him with a neurostim to keep him conscious, which doubled his pain and kept him alive, and I'll take that trade every single time. We made the preaching bridge with the tank running on fumes and the Valentinos on it. A man named Carlos Silva waved us through because by now the right people knew whose side we bled on. At the clinic, Miles finally told me who'd really commissioned the whole thing. Kang Tao, still chasing the ghost of that prototype. Sandevistan from the Atlanta desert, paying a bounty for any scrap of military Sandevistan intel or wreckage. Fine. If Kang Tao wanted to hand me money to hunt the very thing I'd stolen from them, I'd take it, and I set my price high. A military ICE terminal, their best Sandevistan, an MK-31, because a man who's just watched his friend lose a hand is not in a discount mood. And I gave the priest the plague vaccine, 20 doses, 150,000 in leverage wrapped as a gift, along with the intel underneath it. He looked at me for a long moment and said the thing I'd been waiting all week to hear a fixer admit. I underestimated you. Then Dario arrived, broken leg, half a hand of his own, carrying his wounded mother, and became the priest's man, and I counted the cost of the day and started planning the next one. We geared up on borrowed time and other people's money. Lucas got Sergei's own gorilla arms and heavy subdermal armor to replace the hand he'd lost, which is a grim kind of upgrade. You give a man iron fists because the world took his real ones. I pooled everything we had, close to 900,000, and spent more than that on a biorig for my Marvel DNA work and Lucas's arms and Ace's blades, and came out the far side broken in debt to Sergei. I'd also used Ace's name for the credit without asking, so I slid across the floor on my knees to apologize, and she forgave me and logged it as one more thing I owed her, and I gave her the prize from the desert, the true prototype Sandevistan, and told her the truest thing I'd said to her yet. If you feel ready for it, I trust your judgment. Coming from me, that's a larger gift than the chrome. Miles brought the bad news with the good. Rhys Owen had gone fully cyber-psychotic on the operating table, cut his way out of Arroyo and been pointed straight at the Valentinos, and Kang Tao had helpfully arranged us an NCPD outsourcing contract to use lethal force on cyber-psychos before MaxTac could arrive, so the law would look away while we fought a monster it had helped build. A Valentino's honor guard fell in behind us, and then Rhys Owen's convoy came the wrong way up the road and cut our car in half. The rematch was everything the first fight wasn't, because this time I'd done my homework, and this time we had teeth. I bridged straight into his military ICE, the first time I'd cracked that grade of defense head-on, while Lucas's new MK-31 hit him with recoil like field artillery, and Ace's prototype Sandevistan lit up, and the cat sniper punched a 1,500-meter round through his chest plate. Lucas pinned the knee of a mantis blade with his gorilla arms and put the Satara into him at contact range, and my Yinglong static built and built until it broke as an EMP, and in the same instant I crashed the cyberware in his spine and his own ice server with it. For one held second, the monster was just a very large man who'd made very bad choices. Lucas finished him, because Rhys Owen still owed him an arm, and Lucas is a man who collects his debts. Valentino, someone roared behind us. Karga, and the honor guard charged past us into the rest of it. The 6th Street gang did the math and panicked. The idiot they called Burger King was leading a Valentino's charge on Arroyo, and their sergeant got on the line to the priest and surrendered outright. Send your men home, call it off. The priest declined. He hadn't forgotten that the same sergeant months back wouldn't hand over the boy who shot Zara. Everything's ruined, the sergeant said, and Arroyo started coming apart in explosions behind him, and I will admit I enjoyed that more than a dying man should enjoy anything. I led the Valentino's convoy into the 6th Street warehouse at Arroyo, and the sergeant surrendered before we'd finished parking. A war veteran who kept the leg he'd lost in the service as a kind of medal, and who now sat across a table from a kid with his boots up on it. I sold him the plague meds and vaccine samples his own people needed. Then I laid out the blackmail. Gently, the way you explain a fact of physics, hiring a cyberpsycho to terrorize a neighborhood, and quietly siding with the corporations against your own gang are the two things that end a man like him if they ever reach the right ears. He paid $90,000 and called us top-notch mercenaries through his teeth. While he did, I planted a node for my data barrier in his network because every enemy I bankrupt is also free infrastructure. The priest ended the war and paid me $120,000 for it. Gabrielle reopened under new management, and Miles reported that Kang Tao was pleased, which came with another $150,000. We split $360,000 three ways, and after everyone's debts got squared, Lucas had €10,000, I had €10,000, and Ace had $340,000, which is roughly the correct distribution of wealth in any organization I run. We also walked out with VIP cards to the afterlife, and Lucas held his like it was a knighthood, grinning about finally knowing what it feels like to be somebody's big brother. Then the panel flickered, and the channel changed, and I was home in Queens with a whole different set of problems. Lyra's traffic AI worked now, which is to say it had killed people, because a traffic AI that reroutes a city is one bad instruction from a weapon. So I gave her the lecture I give myself. CTOS points straight at predictive policing, and the second you let a machine decide who's about to commit a crime, you've handed someone the power to define crime, and that someone is never you. It can swing elections and steer crowds. It is, in every way that matters, the atomic bomb again, and I have already built one of those. We stay neutral, we hold the switch, and we do not throw it. To help her actually feel the shape of the thing instead of just hearing me say it, I set her up with a game, a role in a distant forum where she played netrunner alongside a man named Caleb Stone in a city called Chicago, watching him pull a mob boss's whole surveillance empire apart from the inside so she could see a world run on CTOS from the ground floor and understand exactly what we were choosing not to become. At the university, Wells's lab had a new assistant, a nervous, brilliant kid named Finn Hayes, who kept sneaking looks at footage of a masked figure swinging between buildings, and who was, though he didn't advertise it, a spider away from being a very famous problem. The iguana DNA had come back better than perfect year, 96.5% survival, 10 times the old numbers, and the only thing between Wells and a miracle was a couple $100,000 in lab renovations. I handed over a chip design from 2077 that made 2011's best silicon look like flint, and then I popped a handful of immunosuppressants like candy in front of him and spiked a fever, and Wells got the alarmed parent look, and the panel confirmed the number I'd been not thinking about. 4 to 6 months to live. The clock hadn't stopped. It had just gotten specific. Money for all of it came from a beautiful piece of spite. A foundry called XMSC was being strangled out of the chip market by a Chinatown financier named Wei Chang, a smaller, meaner photocopy of Kingpin, who was buying his way into a hostile takeover. I wouldn't sell and I wouldn't join, but I licensed my chip patents to XMSC cheap for royalties, which kept them alive, funded Wells, and put a thumb in Wei Chang's eye all at once. My mother told me a little about Latveria that night, the country she'd escaped, a place so soaked in death and funerals that she begged me, quietly, to cherish this one life I had. I didn't tell her it was technically my third. Then I built the thing everything else depended on. The data barrier, first version. An isolated server that gathered every trace of everything we did and rerouted it across the boundary between worlds into a server no investigator in either universe could reach, so that a Kang Tao netrunner or a Militech tracer following my footprints would round the last corner and find nothing there. It's the one trick that makes all the other tricks survivable. Ethan and I signed the Wells and XMSC contracts, and Ethan, run ragged now, a colleague of his had just been murdered by a client for defending Union Allied, and the big firms were fleeing Hell's Kitchen like it was on fire, took the job as the association's lawyer for almost nothing. Outside of the mask, I told him, "You're more of a superhero than you give yourself credit for." He didn't argue, and I went to have dinner at Captain Thomas Hayes' house to deepen a police contract, in a home with a wife who compared me to Tony Stark and wondered aloud how an immigrant kid could afford my kind of education, and a daughter named Zoe who happened to be out that night, which was fine. I'd meet her soon enough. Dinner with Thomas Hayes was a negotiation dressed as a meal. His wife Eleanor sized me up as a discount Tony Stark and wondered, not quietly enough, how my kind afforded my kind of life. I pitched Thomas the real thing I wanted: predictive policing, traffic cameras feeding facial recognition, feeding a public database, crime foreseen and prevented, and Thomas, who is a better man than his job usually rewards, called it what it was: a Patriot Act for one city, dangerous, and something the public would never stomach. So I did the oldest trick in negotiation, which is to ask for the whole roof so that the window you actually wanted feels like a compromise, and retreated to traffic only, and watched him warm to it. You never get everything at once. You get the window now and the roof later, when nobody's looking at the roof. Back in Night City, the Edgerunner kid, Mateo, had carried his mother to a place called Red Shirt Hospital, and I knew that name because Red Shirt is a front, you go in a patient and you come out as parts, which is when the shape of my whole next job clicked together. The plan I'd been circling for weeks finally had a doorway. Get inside Biotechnica through a regional research director named Eleanor Vance, expose the human experiments they'd buried, kidnap her, use her to lure their DNA editing device down to Night City, where I could take it, and turn that stolen science into the medicine that would buy me more than 4 months. Everything I was building, the barrier, the chips, the reputation, all of it pointed at that one tower. Mateo, meanwhile, got the fastest and worst education this city offers, and I'll be honest that I gave it to him. Arasaka Academy's rich kids had been using him for a punching bag, so I robbed the ringleader, locked his kung fu chip into an endless punch loop, and walked off with 7,000 euros and the chip. And the kid decided on the spot that studying was for suckers and followed me around like a duckling. Then Redshirt sent his mother a cheerful photo that said she's fine, and I told him the truth, which is that a fine photo from a place like that means the scavengers are already waiting to kill you both at the door. They were. 4 of them and a bot doctor set up to harvest him and Gloria together, and I walked Mateo through his first real fight, handed him the chip and jammed the scavengers and talked him through the fear, and when he froze and the doctor put him under, I came in and finished what he couldn't. He lived. His mother lived. And I gave him the only lesson that matters out here, the one about dogs and wolves and lions, about how nobody hands you a place at the top, you climb or you get eaten. He dropped out of the academy that day. Even standing atop Arasaka Tower, he said, "It's meaningless if you can't see me from down here." Kid was going to be trouble. Good trouble, if he was lucky. Ace turned up at El Coyote Cojo with new hair, a short gradient of blue and purple and pink, softer than the shaved head, and noogied me for noticing. And across the bar, Luna and Lucas had one of those quiet, sweet moments that made the tarot cards seem a little further away. Then it was time to hand Kang Tao their ghost. Their liaison never left the car, spoke to me through a dialect in a window, took Rhys Owen's Sandevistan and gave me the Dynalar 5 data I'd been chasing. Then he said the sentence I'd been waiting and dreading to hear. That gun is our missing prototype. So I gave it to him, openly. The Yinglong, right into his hands. Because I'd already corrupted its data across the boundary until not even Kang Tao's best netrunners could reconstruct where it had been, and every trail they pulled dead-ended at a AA student named Alex Pizza Palace, who could not possibly be the mastermind who'd humiliated them in Atlanta. The data barrier held. The man drove away certain I was nobody. That certainty was the most expensive thing I owned, and I'd built it for free out of a lie and another universe. We laundered the last of the hot Atlanta weapons through Gabriel to a nomad fixer named Dakota and out into Mexico, cleared 700,000, and I set up a legal smart ammunition line through Miles's workshop that would quietly print money every month. For the first time since I died, we weren't drowning. Which is exactly when Lucas's mother, Mrs. Wells, sat me down for the conversation I couldn't win. She was afraid Lucas would die the way his father died, used up by this city, and she looked at me and said that with me around, maybe Lucas could become somebody, could become my lord. I told her the truth instead of the comfort. I couldn't promise Lucas would be safe. Nobody who does what we do gets that promise. I could only promise I'd never spend him cheaply. She nodded like that was more than she'd expected and less than she'd hoped, which is the only honest way to end that conversation. I met Gary along the way, a street prophet convinced lizard men run the world, which was funny for about 2 seconds until I scanned him and found his implant was genuinely picking up covert frequencies and drowning him in visions. The city drives people mad in ways they've earned and ways they haven't. Luna turned the reversed pope for me, which means deception coming, and filed it under things I already knew. Then I sat my AA license exam, Ripperdoc and technical expert both, and the technical half was gloriously insane. Restore power to a bombed factory, command 16 military robots, defend the line and resume production across 8 brutal simulated hours. And I scored perfect, because I have restored power to worse places than that, in a life these examiners will never know about. The Academy Dean tried to recruit Alex Pizza Palace and found his number disconnected. A white-haired netrunner named Ava tried to hack me around then and bounced off my ice like a bird off a window, then grabbed Mateo with a monomolecular wire to save face. I cut her wire, told her Mateo wasn't mine to ransom, and walked off, and she recruited him on the spot, which is how those two started, which is a story that ends in a way I'd have spared them if the world let me spare anyone. Then, the afterlife. The most famous Merc bar in the world, named for the fact that everyone in the photos on the wall is dead. Kai Sterling, Liam Irons, Cyrus Hammer. Lucas nearly vibrated out of his skin. He ordered a cocktail named after a dead legend. I ordered a soda and enjoyed being the strangest man in the room. When Lucas asked about my line, the one about walking into Arasaka Tower with basic chrome and burning it down like the sun, I finally told him where it came from, Liam Irons and the Arasaka nuke, and admitted I'd dressed it up to light a fire under Ace. Then I told him the thing I actually needed him to hear, because I'd read the ending of enough stories to know how his kind tends to go. Don't chase a glorious death, Lucas. Anybody can die spectacular. Decide how you want to live. He thought about it and named his next drink A Little Love, and I let myself hope that would be enough. The job that changed everything came from a fixer named Preston, a company bootlicker with a nice suit and a commission from Arasaka. Investigate a secret research pact between Militech and Biotechnica here in Night City. His crew came with a man named Brick, all muscle and grievance, who took one look at us and started counting his own kills out loud. 17, like it was a large number. Ace didn't bother telling him what our 3 had done to the 6th Street Gang and 2 corporate hit squads and a Militech platoon in the Atlanta Sand. She just smiled at him the way you smile at a child bragging about a paper cut, and I knew we were about to make a friend the hard way. The job had a name, Project Nightingale, and a body count already. A girl named Cleo had died a year back trying to get inside it, chasing the drug that had killed her mother. I read the real client off the shape of the thing in about a minute. Arasaka, aiming at Militech through a Biotechnica proxy. I told Preston I don't work under anyone. I'd investigate on my own, sell him the results, and leave no trail back to either of us. He didn't like it, and he agreed anyway, because the alternative was getting nothing. The door in was red ochre, because the tribe I'd been quietly saving had also been Biotechnica's very first test subjects, and I hadn't known the half of it. A heavily chromed tribesman named Damien had stolen a friend's corpse and gone hunting the people responsible, and by the time we caught up to him, he'd tipped over the edge into cyberpsychosis. When he opened the body bag in the daylight, the corpse caught fire, the dead man's cells reacting to plain sunlight like it was acid, and that one horrible detail told me everything about what Biotechnica had done to these people. We put Damien down without killing him, which was its own kind of work because his blood had gone toxic and fluorescent and you did not want it on your skin, and we pulled a burned survivor out of the wreck, a man named Leo Flynn with his face half eaten away, who took about 4 seconds to decide he'd rather help me destroy Biotechnica than protect it. Flynn's Law, I called him, and put him to work. The truth Marcus finally told me was the ugliest kind, the kind people walk into with their eyes open. Biotechnica hadn't just experimented on his tribe. They'd sold them a fairy tale, photosynthesis, the promise that one day they'd live on sunlight and chase the sun across the world forever, free of hunger and free of the company store. And the old chieftain had believed it because a dying people will believe anything shaped like hope. That's the thing I keep running into out here. Once a person decides what they want to be true, they'll do the deceiving themselves, and you barely have to lift a finger. Lucas chasing his legend, Marcus chasing his sunlight, me telling myself every kind thing I do isn't also a move on the board. The medicine underneath it all led me to a new Ripper doc named Wei, More Technologies, top shelf gear including a DNA scanner, and he told me Flynn's decay was unfixable without a maintenance device, 30 years and millions. Right up until I walked to his wall and wrote out the DNA decay algorithm from memory and watched a very good scientist go pale. Because here was the key I'd been turning toward the whole time, in both worlds at once. That decay model could be run backwards to reconstruct a person's original DNA. Wells' model back in the Marvel world had stalled for years for one reason nobody could see. It wasn't a general formula. It was one specific dead man's own genetic code, Arthur Reed's, which is why it only ever described him and never anyone else. The thing blocking a Nobel laureate on one side of the universe was the exact thing about to save my life on the other. I bought a channel to a scrapped DNA device, begged another loan off Ace, and started planning the robbery that all of this had been for. The next move was Nora Kuno, Flynn's boss at Biotechnica, and I reached her wearing Flynn's own voice. I had his backdoor, so I had his throat, and threatened to expose the workplace injury that had melted his face, until she panicked and agreed to meet in Japantown. What I didn't know was that inside Biotechnica, a manager named Shaw was already busy stabbing his own director in the back, feeding Kuno a doctored chip to leak, all of it designed to bury a regional director named Eleanor Vance and take her chair. Corporate murder has a lot of hands in it, and most of them are stabbing each other. We met Kuno in a Tiger Claws alley, and she'd barely started offering to sell us a story that blamed Vance when a sword came out of thin air, an assassin in full optical camouflage, and cut her down before she finished the sentence with a Tiger Claws blade, so the frame would point at the gang and then at us. It was a corporate agent killing his own contact to paint the walls with my crew's names. I do not enjoy being set up. I took it personally. The chase that followed cost me a spleen I didn't have to spare, a laser tripwire mine that Ace set off early and saved us from the worst of booby-trapped motorcycles I had to disarm on the fly, while I got Haruna Sato, the queen of Japantown, on the line and convinced her that a corporate ghost had done this in her house, which bought me the minutes I needed. I sent Lucas and Ace downtown after the assassin on the disarmed bikes, and Lucas did the single most Lucas thing I have ever witnessed. He overloaded his engine with a horn and a lungful of fuel, and rocket jumped the whole thing over a river of traffic, and two self-driving bikes I'd aimed like missiles slammed the agent off the road. Lucas cornered him and put an uppercut through him, and the man, a step from Corpo Plaza and the corporate immunity that lives there, chose suicide over capture, and Lucas plucked the bloody chip out of the wreck. Then the NCPD came for all of us, because in a beautiful irony, we were also on their outsourcing payroll, hunting ourselves. I spotted Mateo and Ava already in the back of a squad car. Mateo had, in the middle of all this, stolen something and then beaten up the man he stole it from, which is the most Mateo arrest imaginable. So I hired him for $5,000 to start a riot in that car, glitch the officer's cyberware, and use the vehicle's own uplink to hijack the police network, scrub Lucas's and Ace's faces out of it, and point the entire manhunt at a random sports car across town. Mateo drove us out of it, badly, and I recruited him and Ava for real, and the NCPD hunt got quietly cancelled from above because a councilman named Norwood and the corporations behind him had decided this whole thing needed to disappear. Haruna confirmed the assassin's optical camo was official corporate hardware, cleared the tiger claws and use of the frame, and paid me for the trouble on top of a standing job hunting corporate ghosts. Somewhere in a tower, Biotechnica was starting to understand that the thing chewing through their operation wasn't a rival corporation. It was three idiots in a broken Mackinac, and they had no idea yet how bad it was going to get. The doctored chip was built to hang everything on a woman named Olivia Shaw instead of Vance, which meant I needed to find Shaw before Biotechnica erased her, and the trail said Shaw, just fired, was about to meet a journalist named Ramirez and a second reporter named Sutton at a downtown subway station. Any fool could see the shape of that meeting. It wasn't an interview. It was a kill box, 4 inconvenient people gathered in one place so a corporation could file them all under one accident. I told the crew what we were really doing under all the layers, because they'd earned it. I was going to rob Biotechnica's DNA technology to save my own life, and if we could drag every corporate crime into daylight on the way, so much the better. Ace and Lucas didn't flinch. We're already heroes, Ace said. The core of punk is the guts to say no. And I believed her, mostly, which out here is a form of love. We geared up for a war in a subway. I built a parallel computing warehouse out of my chips and the Marvel server, with Lyra on Firewatch so I could crack military ICE across the boundary in real time. I had Wells quietly breed me a single Sterling-grade spider for later, and I hired Ava to own the station's network because the subway ran on a Night Corp backbone Militech couldn't lock me out of. Then I put Mateo and his crew in position, told Brick to open fire and draw Militech's teeth forward, and stepped into the meat grinder on purpose. Militech had brought a blockade to a murder, 2 behemoths, a full platoon, 2 Achilles marksmen, a heavy machine gun, all to erase 4 unarmed people. That was their mistake, bringing an army to do a quiet thing, because an army is loud and a quiet thing stays quiet only if nobody louder shows up. We were louder. Mateo dropped a guard with an Iron Mountain strike. Ava seized the station net out from under them, and I reached into the traffic grid overhead and pulled a steel torrent of hijacked cars down into the street as cover and charged in behind it. Ace put a 1,500-meter round through the commander of the 2nd Behemoth, her 4th by then, and she keeps count. And when Brick got pinned with his arm shattered, screaming my name like it was a prayer, Lucas's Satara and Ace's rocket hit the blockade from behind and folded it inward. The crossfire did the rest in under 2 minutes, Militech's own killbox closing on Militech, and I'll spare you the inventory of it. They came to make a massacre and got to be in one instead. When stray Militech rounds caught civilians who'd only wanted a train, Lucas tossed them medkits mid-fight because he is a better man than this city deserves and a worse mercenary for it, and I love him for exactly that ratio. We confirmed Olivia Shaw alive and holding real evidence. I cracked a behemoth's military ice from a warehouse in another universe, and we walked out the back with 2 behemoths on autopilot as decoys and 11 people crammed into the Mackinac under a hearse cover, the whole thing reading, to any satellite, like one more corporate skirmish with no ghosts in it anywhere. Somewhere upstairs, a Militech colonel had already popped the champagne for a clean operation, right up until the alert scrolled across his desk. Personnel, killed in action, all of them. Mateo and Ava peeled off with their pay, Ava watching me dance on the knife edge between 2 megacorporations with something between horror and worship on her face. Mateo just grinning that this was, in his exact words, awesome. And the Militech command scrambled, 34 dead, 2 behemoths stolen, and no manpower left to spare on protecting one regional director who'd used personal favors to start this mess. That was the whole engine of my strategy, and I'll say it plainly because it's the only thing keeping us alive. I cannot beat a corporation, nobody can, but I can make 2 of them look at each other. Every hacked behemoth, every stolen prototype, every ghost in the wiring makes Arasaka trust Militech a little less, and Militech trust everyone a little less, and the hairline crack between the giants is the only ground a person like me gets to stand on. The rich only ever lose when they're busy suspecting each other. They tested that theory on the road home with an Emperor Ragnar and 4 drones. Lucas stood in the storm and let his armor eat it. The looted Achilles rifles knocked the drones down. Grenades and a rocket out of the hearse bed gutted the Ragnar, and then it came down to Ace against a Militech lieutenant named Keller, Sandevistan against her Dynalar and Kerenzikov. 9 seconds of 2 people moving faster than the eye can follow. Keller's Sandevistan overloaded first. Ace's didn't. She's not the fastest thing in the city anymore, but she is the meanest, and mean lasts longer than fast. Militech recovered 2 empty behemoths and understood slowly that the entire crew had ridden out of their kill box in the one broken pickup truck they'd waved through, and their colonel counted his dead and went quiet. We regrouped at Delamain, a company so thoroughly run by its own AI that it had bought out every human it ever employed and now offered the one genuinely neutral taxi ride in Night City. There, Shaw finally told us where the Nightingale data actually lived, not in the tower, but in a fake car plant called Blackbuck, a fraudulent Impala Motors factory that was really a Biotechnica server farm, and she had the subordinate backdoors to open it. And there, Marcus brought me the bill for all of it. The Red Ochre tribe marched on Haywood behind a glass-fronted coffin holding one of their burned dead, half-protest and half-battering ram to pull the city's eyes and the NCPD's hands toward them. The old chieftain had dosed every healthy tribesman he had left and was sending them at the corporation as a suicide charge, and he read me the names of the dead like a man reading his own eulogy and asked me one thing: protect Julian. Protect the ones young enough to still have a life. Red Ochre awaits your command. There are debts you take on that you know you'll never fully pay, and you say yes anyway, because the alternative is being the kind of man who says no. I said yes. I split the job in 2. Brick's crew would hit Blackbuck, the fake factory, using Shaw's back doors and the Red Ochre charge for cover. It had an Arasaka mech guarding it, but a mech is just a computer with legs if you have the right stolen accounts. And I took all the blame for the whole operation onto my data fortress, so that on paper, it stayed Preston's job. Comms damaged, mission continued. Old Captain, Preston's own brother, would quietly inherit the factory afterward because I don't waste real estate. Delamain delivered Sergei's materials, and from the other world, the single genetically modified spider wells had grown for me, and with that spider's silk gland and a night of work, I built the thing this whole plan had been quietly waiting for: magnetic gloves, electrostatic shoe covers, a web shooter loaded with real spider silk. The panel helped me draft it off a template, magnetic climbing gear from some soldier's future, and I hand-built it in minutes while the crew watched like I was doing card tricks. Microgenerators, fuel tanks, the works. I clipped it all on, looked at Ace and Lucas, and said the sentence I'd been saving. Tonight, we climbed the Biotechnica tower. Meanwhile, the corporation was busy eating its own. Vance got demoted, told to go home and reflect, and abandoned so completely that a citywide warrant went out on her, and not one company objected. She called in every favor she had, and found every hand had let go of hers. She was alone and hunted, which I would have found sad if I'd had the time. The infiltration is the part I'd have paid to see from the outside. Ace and Lucas went up the Delamain building on magnetic gloves, me riding Lucas's back like a very tense backpack, and then we web swung between skyscrapers, over the drop, toward Corpo Plaza. Ace's first swing tore a holy cow out of her that echoed off 3 buildings. I'd spent this whole life reading about the people who do this for free, and now here we were, 3 broke mercenaries cosplaying a spider over the richest square kilometer on Earth because the front door was 100 soldiers and the window was empty air. Corpo Plaza was locked down like a fortress expecting a god. War machines, Max Tac on standby, Stinger float cars prowling the sky, and Biotechnica's real. Trick was that its building wasn't just a tower, it was a horizontal empire, a kilometer-long aerial sky bridge 400 meters up, a whole corporation stretched across the sky. To cross the last highway gap, Lucas wound up and hurled me with his gorilla arms, and Ace caught me out of the air on a web, and I tried very hard not to think about what my body would look like if her timing had been off by a quarter second. We climbed to the great aerial cross structure and found our way in. Maintenance drones they called bumblebees, patrolling on 10-minute loops through a dozen openings. Hijack the last one, and it becomes a data channel straight into the building, a way to walk Shaw's employee accounts past the military ICE from the inside. 20 minutes of quiet work, and I had window opening permissions on account 10039. 70th floor, I said. Let's go to work. A maintenance drone filed a fake repair report. A 70th floor window slid open, and we dropped into a bathroom so expensive it had a view. Why is it always a toilet? I said, to no one, and I gave Brick the word. Begin the attack. Down on the ground, Blackbuck lit up. The Red Ochre nomads went in the way Marcus had promised, burning cars and rockets and drivers who lit themselves on fire screaming the company's name, and I will not dress that up because they didn't. Brick's crew breached in the chaos. A nomad car pinned the Arasaka mech long enough for Sophia to hijack a robot arm and wreck it. Pip uploaded the stolen accounts, and the mech woke back up on our side and turned on the people who'd built it. They bagged a manager named Tenzin, and my hijacking device was in place. 2 fronts, 1 clock. In Vance's office, Ace and Lucas held the regional director at gunpoint while I went through her head and then her database, wiping our faces from her memory as I went. The Nightingale project, it turned out, was a quiet atrocity with a scientific paper attached. Edit human DNA to move pain sensitivity into electromagnetic sensitivity, so a soldier feels nothing. And the reason the Red Ochre tribe was dying was pettier and worse than any grand conspiracy. A marketing man named Volkov had dumped a batch of expiring drugs on them to hit a quota, and the gamma rabies did the rest. I made Vance requisition the DNA gene editing machine down from headquarters, and she agreed too easily, betting her whole self on a comeback, thinking I was just another thief who wanted a payday. Then I dove deeper than she wanted me to, Sandevistan wide open, and the floor fell out of my own plan. Nightingale was Militech sponsored all along, a fix for a painkiller that quietly ate the nerves of the men who took it, and the machine I'd come to steal was already in the building. Vance hadn't been abandoned. Vance had been left here as bait, with me as the fish, and the whole tower was the hook. I'd misread her, and I'd misread her for a reason that should have warned me. Every corporate rat I'd met until now had been disloyal, so I'd stopped expecting loyalty, and Vance was loyal, betting everything on clawing her way back. It's the mistakes that fit your own worldview that kill you, Lucas said very quietly. A Stinger float car, and then the glass came in. Down on a television across the city, a burned nomad named Blaze tore off his shirt on a live talk show to show the world what Biotechnica had done to his skin, dug a bullet out of his own arm with his fingers. Remember this, I did it, and fired it. All of it real, all of it broadcasting while a smug host tried to bury him under ad breaks. And in the same breath, a cat sniper round from somewhere outside the tower shattered the office glass because Vance's trap had sprung and the corporate counter-move had arrived. Vance bolted for the door. Ace put an Achilles round through the back of her head before she reached it. Clean, done. And I stood in a room full of broken glass 400 meters up, having walked my 2 best friends into a hook baited just for me, and said the only honest thing available. Now what? A Militech manticore hung outside the shattered window and fired into the room, and we ran deeper into the building. I grabbed Vance's access token off her body on the way, because I am nothing if not practical about the recently dead E, and that's when Max Tack arrived. The unit they send when a situation is past police and into monster, a second manticore, an inspector named Quinn, and 4 super soldiers, and they came in curious, not afraid, interested. That's the thing about being good enough to matter. You stop being a target and start being a recruitment opportunity, and both of those want you dead if you say no. The building sealed, 100 soldiers, robots, 2 Stinger Aerodynes, and I fought it the only way I could, in 2 places at once. In the real world we went up, swapping weapons on the move, Lucas tanking rounds so Ace could dual wield, and EMP dropped down an elevator full of robots, gorilla arms punching straight through walls to skip the blockades they built for us. In cyberspace, I ran a live duel against Max Tack's own netrunner through Shaw's 13 accounts and the server humming in another universe, and I edged it, barely, because I had a whole extra world's worth of computing power and they had a budget. Militech got humiliated in its own tower. And Quinn, watching 3 broke nobodies handle her lockdown like it was a warm-up, decided we were Max Tack grade talent going to waste, melted her own safety tether, and stepped off the Aerodyne into open air to come get us herself. She split us up the way a predator splits a herd. Her thermal mantis blades overpowered Ace's cheap climbing gear. The big one, the bulletproof brute they called by a number, took Lucas. A sniper took me because I was the weak one, the paper cup, the least of the 3 on paper, so I made the paper count. I sent Ace to blow the building's power and Lucas to the servers, and I let the sniper corner me, and when their netrunner jacked in to scan the pathetic little target and mock what he found, I laughed at him. Then I opened my Sandevistan all the way. No limiter, no ceiling, the true prototype doing the one thing it was really built for, and dropped into cyberspace without an interface, bare, and built a wall of ice around myself in the half-second his contempt gave me. He connected to finish me. He connected to the Abyss Walker. His brain burned out where he sat. The sniper saw my head tilt and my body go slack and read it as a dead man because that's what it looked like, because I'd stopped my own heart and let the auxiliary one idle so low it registered as a corpse. He dropped me on the floor like garbage, which was exactly where I needed to be. Ace was losing. Quinn was her own nightmare mirror, the same reflexes, better gear, a full Max Tack loadout against Ace's street chrome, and talent without resources is just talent, which is a lesson the city teaches everyone eventually. Lucas was losing worse, throwing gorilla arm punches at a brute whose skull was rated bulletproof and whose berserk component ate the damage, and Ace's power surge EMP fizzled against his shielding. They beat my two friends down to the floor. And then Quinn, trying to be kind in the Max Tack way, told Ace the recruitment pitch that had once been Quinn's own origin. "You're wasted out here, come be one of us," and closed it with the fact she thought would break Ace clean. "Your netrunner's dead. His human server is scrapped. There's nothing left to run." Ace believed her, and Ace did not break clean. She broke the other way. I have watched a lot of people tip into cyberpsychosis, studied their brains at the moment the person drowns and the weapon surfaces. I had never watched it happen to someone because they thought I'd died. Ace's readings went off every scale I had, and Mad Ace moved faster than Sane Ace ever could, faster than Quinn's 80%. Sandevistan, grief and chrome and rage fused into one screaming thing, and she killed the sniper who dropped me, threw his own broken blade through him by hand, and then ran dry, out of ammo, out of energy, out of everything, and folded to the floor while Quinn stood over her deciding how to cart her off. Here is what I was doing while my best friend went mad believing me dead, and I'm not proud of the timing, only the result. My auxiliary heart was running flat out, buying me maybe 6 minutes of life after the brain burn, and I spent them crawling to the DNA machine, to the monitoring jar beside it, the one full of nutrient fluid. I jailbroke both with a power surge, climbed into the fluid, and switched worlds, because my two bodies are separate, and the brain damage was only in this one, and a man who can pilot a second body across the universe does not have to stay in the one that's dying. I woke up in Wells' lab in Queens, whole, clear-headed, and reached back across the boundary to run the Night City body like a drone, bypassing the ruined brain entirely. Then I gave Wells the last thing he needed. Biotechnica's DNA cutting technology, Cas proteins, guide RNA, the whole stolen toolkit, and he synthesized it, right there, the lizard man serum, imperfect and alive. Back in the tower, a Militech cleanup team gathered around the corpse of the notorious Burger King, floating in a Biotechnica jar with an empty syringe standing up out of his chest, and congratulated themselves on a body. Then the body opened its eyes. The pupils were vertical slits now, gold and reptile, and the last thing several of them managed to say was some version of ghost. The thing that came out of the jar was 3 meters of me with none of my manners. The lizard serum had rewritten the whole Night City body, regrown it monstrous, huge, fast, and it came with a gift I'd bet my life on. The serum kills your cyberware as it takes you, which meant every clever thing Max Tack had prepared to hack was suddenly attached to a body that no longer ran on anything they could reach. The brute with the bulletproof skull swung at where my fists used to be. I gave him claws instead. Quinn turned to see what the screaming was about, and I caught her mid-turn with a tail like a falling tree and put her through a wall. Lucas, bless his heart, watched a monster grab him and concluded sincerely that something had eaten me. It took me calling him an idiot in my own voice before he understood the reptile was on his side. By every rule of the serum, I should have been gone by then. Berserk. Carnivorous. A mind drowned in appetite. That's the flaw. That's what it does to everyone. But the heart of evolution reached in and deleted the madness the way it deletes fear, the way it deletes everything that tries to drive me, and left me exactly one thing, a very large lizard with a to-do list, item 1 on the list. I reached into the Marvel server and everything I had and triggered an EMP the size of a weather event, and every light in Corpo Plaza, the richest, most fortified square kilometer on the planet, went out at once. I put around through the last Stinger float car on my way past a broken window. "Good night, Corpo Plaza," I told the dark, because some lines you save your whole life for. Then we left the hard way, which for us is the only way. I leapt the aerial gap carrying both of them, hijacked the Max Tack Manticore out of the sky, and shut Ace's cyberware down until the madness drained out of her and she came back to herself in the passenger seat, blinking, alive. "I thought you were dead," she said. "You made me think my 700 grand was wasted." I told her that if she felt that strongly about it, it was better to just keep owing it, and she almost smiled. Behind us, both hijacked manticores flew themselves into the incoming reinforcement aerodynes, and 3 war machines came down into Corpo Plaza in flames, and every camera in the city that still had power caught it. That's the image that did the real damage, not the theft. The picture of the untouchable place, dark and burning, with corporate war machines falling into it, beamed to 7 million people who'd been told their whole lives that the towers were forever. The Megacorp's alliance cracked down the middle that night, everyone whispering about a 5th corporate war, and the city, watching the gods bleed on live TV, decided it had been afraid long enough. Night City rioted. The blackout and the burning towers were a match to a thing that had been soaked in fuel for 50 years, and the poor came out into the streets all at once. The NCPD tried to chase us and drowned instead in a flood of decoy Mackinaws, every one of them nomad-driven, while Julian, 15 years old, the boy Lucas had handed a rifle to in the desert, drove our actual escape steady as a veteran. Two cops in the mess of it, an idealist named Elias and his tired partner, kept asking the question the whole night was asking, and none of the powerful would answer. Who turned these people into this? Nobody up in the towers was going to tell him, but I knew. And so did everyone else down in the dark with a brick in their hand. The blackout held for 30 minutes, and in 30 minutes of a dark, hackable city, everything that could be stolen or exposed got stolen and exposed. But the real move, the one I'd built the whole job around, was quieter than the riot. I took every scrap of the Nightingale data, the human experiments, the poisoning, the Militech Pact, all of it, and I dumped the entire weight of it onto Preston, the bootlicker who'd hired us, so that when Arasaka came looking for answers, they found their own contractor holding the stolen DNA components and the incriminating files. Arasaka's own director scooped him up, and just like that, Arasaka was holding the blame for the whole atrocity. The corporation that had aimed all of this at Militech was now wearing it. Petrochem and Savoil started moving armies over the CHOOH wheat monopoly the scandal had cracked open. The giants turned on each other exactly as designed, and the only thing the whole tangle of them could agree on was that some crew with an extremely brain-dead name had done it, and none of them could prove which crew. Job done. I came for my life and the tech to save it, and I left with both, and the war was just the exhaust. We ran for the Badlands the way Rogue and Silverhand once ran after they burned Arasaka Tower, because that's what you do after you do something the world can't forgive. You disappear into the sand until it forgets your face. At sunrise, the last of the nomads who'd charged the tower, a man named Elton, met the light the way his tribe had chosen to, and when I counted the cost of the night, it came to 44 red ochre dead. 44 people I'd used and saved and used all at once. Julian, who leads them now, didn't cry when he told me. He said they'd lived the most glorious day of their lives, and I think he even believed it, and I think in the specific arithmetic of a people the world had already sentenced to die of engineered plague. He might have been right. Elton had killed Militech scouts once to save his farm. These people were never serial killers. Look them in the eyes, their old chieftain used to say, and you'll see that. I gave Julian the only thing I have that's worth passing down, which is the creed I keep failing to live up to. A legend isn't a good death. A legend is a person who decided to live for themselves instead of on their knees. Then we laid low. In the quiet after, with no money, because the goal had never been money, the goal had been my own heartbeat and the tech now sitting in Wells's lab, Lucas and Ace did the math on the whole insane run and shrugged at it, the way you shrug at whether you survived. I could pounce on a manticore now. I was healthier than I'd been since I first woke up freezing in that harvest room. Ace looked me over, this newly alive man who'd been a corpse in a jar 12 hours ago, and asked the only question that mattered to her about my miraculous reptilian resurrection. So where's the tail? It was gone. I was human again, or my usual approximation of it, and for the first time in 3 lifetimes, the clock in my chest had stopped counting down. The Badlands paid us in strange currency. Old Captain Preston's brother, who'd quietly inherited Santo Domingo when I fed Preston to Arasaka, delivered Ace a stolen quadra with 1,000 horsepower, and the first time she floored it, both she and Lucas passed out from the G-force, knocked cold by pure joy. I handed Old Captain the Nightingale chips to sell around and some beautifully fake footage of a legendary Mackinaw, and let the story write itself. Across the boundary, Lyra finished what she'd started in her Chicago game. She and Caleb Stone took down the mob boss who'd been running that whole city through its surveillance grid, leaked the database, and the panel closed the book on CTOS version 1 with the Crossworld channel now fully open. A double-edged sword, I reminded her. We hold it. We don't swing it. Whether Aiden was ever real, I told her, depends entirely on what you learned from him. My mother had a request, and it was the one that would eventually pull a thread through everything. Help our people, she said, the ones still back in Latveria. My grandfather had taken her out of that country and then gone back and joined some Eastern European labs experiment for the promise of a better life, and never returned. And I sat there recognizing the exact machine that had killed the Red Ochre tribe, running in a different accent on a different continent. I filed it under debts I'd be paying for a long time. The science, meanwhile, came together beautifully and then showed its teeth. We tested the lizard serum on the iguana, and it worked. The lizard regrew a severed tail, grew larger, and turned vicious and carnivorous. The first successful transgenic experiment in this world after Sterling's own. That success also named the flaw. The serum doesn't just heal you, it turns you into something bigger and hungrier and gone, a lizard man with none of the man left. I'd only survived it in Night City because the heart of evolution deletes the madness the way it deletes fear. Nobody else has that. But there was a way to thread it. The same nerve-degrading painkiller drug from the Nightingale Project, balanced against the lizardization, could hold a person in human shape and hand them their health back. And Finn, brilliant and half-listening, spotted a second gift hiding in the work. Run it through bone marrow and you could mass-produce human blood in a world short 40 million units of it. I volunteered as the first donor because I was going to be the first patient anyway. I acquired an accountant in the middle of all this, a debt-drowned movie superfan named Carlisle who'd sunk a fortune into building a dinosaur park nobody asked for and now merged his wreckage into mine. I need a man who dreams too big and counts every penny, and he was both. And I met the Osborns. Harry, Finn's decent doomed best friend, and Norman, the CEO with the kind face and the watching eyes. A man I knew was one bad day from growing horns. Norman took Finn aside and told him gently that Harry had a hereditary disease, the same one that took Harry's mother, and that the research Finn was working on could save his friend, and I watched a good kid get handed a guilt heavy enough to make him do something stupid. I made a note. Sterling Thorne had just loaded a gun and pointed it at my whole operation using Finn's conscience as the trigger. Then it was time to stop being sick. I designed a new auxiliary heart, 3-chambered serum and painkiller and slow release all in one, a self-medicating pain editor built into my own chest, and there was only one person I trusted to hand me the instruments while I opened myself up. I asked my mother. Alara had been a nurse once, and she went pale when I showed her the machine in my chest and the green potion beside it, and then she steadied, because she is stronger than anyone who's only met her at a stove would guess. With her assisting and my chip-driven gloves doing the fine work, I cut open my own chest, rebuilt the heart, injected 3 milliliters of the serum, and healed. Clear-headed, steady, cured. For the first time across 3 lives, I was a healthy man. My mother cried and held my face and told me that no matter what I turned into, she only needed me to be safe. I promised her I'd try, which is the most honest thing I know how to say. Then the CTOS lit up with an alert I did not want. Finn Hayes, abnormal entry, Wells Lab. Finn had let himself into the lab and injected himself with the lizard serum because Norman's guilt had done exactly what Norman built it to do. And here's the butterfly effect twist this world had waiting for me. Finn Hayes was not Spider-Man here. Zoe Stacy was. Finn was just a brilliant, desperate kid with no spider and no safety net. And by the time I reached campus, he'd already turned into a 3-meter lizard bigger than mine and started burrowing toward his own high school. I called Thomas Hayes because I needed the city's eyes and a man who'd bring the right tool, and Thomas brought a searchlight because the one thing that dazes these creatures is raw light. The battle at Midtown High was the first time I got to be the coach instead of the fist, and I found I liked the view. Zoe, Spider-Woman, webs, and all swung in over a schoolyard full of screaming kids. The lizard that used to be Finn came up through the gym floor like a bad thought, and I sat in a car 3 blocks away with a walkie-talkie, narrating a disaster in the calmest voice I owned. Thomas brought the searchlight. He hit the thing full in the face with it, and 3 meters of monster flinched, dazzled, blind for half a second. Enough. Now the concrete, I told Zoe. There's a demolition stack on the east wall. 10 tons. Drop it on him. She hesitated. You want me to crush him? And I told her the truth. Not to kill him. To crush the serum out of him. Every ton of pressure accelerates the reaction, eating his DNA, drains the tank faster, so she dropped it. The lizard went down under a mountain of rubble, thrashing, shrinking a little with every blow, and I talked her through the next part. He's still wearing the monitoring ports. Hit them. Inject the antidote back into his own body. She missed the first port. The lizard came up out of the rubble faster than she could web, so I went in myself. Gloves, web shooter, the whole spider act, and under my skin something older answered the call. I let just enough of my own reptile up to match his speed, and I chased Finn across the ruins of his own school, caught him on the 3rd pass, pinned the port, put the 2nd dose in, and then I watched 3 meters of nightmare fold down and down into a shaking, crying kid who had only ever wanted to save his best friend. Keep this quiet, I told everyone still standing. Nobody died. 2.25 million in property damage, 1 school reduced to gravel, and not 1 body, which in my line of work is what a clean sheet looks like. Finn confessed everything at his trial. He's constitutionally incapable of lying. It's his best and worst quality, and got 5 years suspended down to 2.5 with the lab eating 30% and a mountain of debt on top. His Uncle Joe and Aunt Sue weren't angry, they were heartbroken, which is so much worse to watch. And underneath it all sat Sterling Thorne's fingerprints, invisible and everywhere, the man who'd told Finn about Harry's disease in the first place. I also learned why the government and the corporations wouldn't simply seize my DNA technology, even knowing I had it. The scandal was radioactive. The politics were a minefield, and nobody wanted to be the name attached to the next Lab 2, because there'd already been a Lab 2. 4 researchers dead in an Sterling-sponsored facility, poisoned slow by inhaled DNA agents and a leaking dispersal device, and months of the overtime that had given them cancer before the accident ever finished the job. I decided to publish the principles and keep the algorithms locked in my own skull, where no warrant can reach. A SHIELD agent named Coulson came sniffing around to ask if I'd dosed myself and whether I'd like to be regulated for my own good, and I declined the leash and tipped him about the genetically modified lizards still missing out in the world, because a working relationship with the people who clean up messes is worth more than a fight with them. The world, he agreed, is not a peaceful place. Then Wei Chang came to invest, and I need to tell you about Wei, because Wei becomes important. A Chinatown financier with a good and evil reversing power, he keeps very quiet. A man whose parents died before his success ever arrived, which is the wound at the center of him. He offered to take 10% of the company to cover the compensation I owed, and I bet him I'd deliver 1,000 units of manufactured whole blood in 3 weeks. And when I told him, plainly, that I actually hoped good things could come true in this world, something in him moved, because nobody had said that to him and meant it in a long time. He tried his power on me on the way out, quietly, the way he tests everyone, reached into me to pull the darkness up, and found nothing to grab, because the heart of evolution doesn't let anything drive me, not even the truth of what I am. We registered the company together, International Genetic Cooperation, artificial blood, 80% mine, and Finn joining on probation, and a partner who now knew I couldn't be corrupted and didn't yet know whether that made me the safest man he'd ever met, or the most dangerous. Zoe found me afterward to thank me for not giving up on Finn, flustered in a way that told me she'd half figured out who I was, and I steered her, gently, because she was a high schooler and I am something like 40 on the inside, toward solving the Lab 2 case herself, toward being the kind of hero this city could actually see. Set the right example, I told her. The city's watching. It always is. Across the boundary, the Badlands were closing around us. My fake footage had done something ridiculous. The legendary Mackinac sent Thornton's stock up 112%, 40 billion euros in a week, the one clean comedy in the whole affair. But Militech had tightened its grip on the wasteland. The wraiths were expanding, supplies were gone, and we were trapped with the Aldecaldos, a nomad nation once millions strong and now scattered down to a few desperate hundreds. Their elder, a smuggler named Kalen Stone, was ready to fold the whole tribe and walk away, and I gave him the speech I keep giving in this world under different names. You can't leave. The checkpoint wants a scapegoat, and it'll never clear you. So stand. Are you stray dogs waiting to be put down, or are you a free people who go where they choose? He said he'd think about it, which from a nomad elder is nearly a yes. The way out ran through proof. Militech's blockade rested on a lie, a fabricated lizard man threat cooked up by a Militech director named Meredith Stout, who I'd tangled with before and who'd been promoted for the Corpo Plaza disaster she blamed on us. So I set about handing her the truth she couldn't afford. We hunted down the cyber psychos Militech's own drug-mad enforcers kept becoming, caught one alive for a fixer named Karina as evidence. And every time Militech's story cracked a little, the blockade breathed a little looser. Then the drones came, 7 Militech Griffins hunting the camp, and it ended with Lucas planting his legs and catching a falling drone out of the air like Atlas taking the sky, holding it while I finished the surgery on my own nerves and hacked the whole swarm out of the sky at once. The pilots turned out to be wraiths, the cruelest gang in the Badlands, flying Militech hardware for drug money. And once we caught them, Kalen stopped thinking. Aldecaldos, he roared. Do not take this loss. And the camp, which had been dying, decided to live. I gave them a reason to. The artificial blood was finished, and I mass-produced it right there in the Badlands. Lizard serum bone marrow spun into whole blood, and poured it into the bleeding and the shot until people who should have died by nightfall were sitting up by morning. That's the thing that actually turns a tribe, more than any speech. Not a legend, a transfusion, real income, real medicine, their vitality coming back into them without a single corporate leash attached. Sierra Vance came back to the camp, and Cole and Stinger got pulled half dead out of a wraith trap, and around a tent that night, everyone traded the stupid names they'd given themselves as kids. Mine involved swinging a stick and calling it a sword. Lucas's involved a mistranslated tattoo, because everyone does something foolish to feel bigger than they are, and knowing that about each other is most of what family is. The plan took shape at a war council of 28 underfed people with 4 days of food. Rob Moore's scrapped DNA equipment off the Santo Domingo Dam. Militech thought it was junk, but I knew exactly what it was worth. Arm ourselves on the proceeds and then hit the Wraith's stronghold and take everything they had. And the fixer Dakota Smith gave me the name that made Damien go very still. The Wraith who'd been hunting the tribe, the one behind all of it, was Graham, the red ochre trader who'd sold his own people years ago and made himself Damien's mortal enemy in the doing. You'll get your chance to clean house, I told Damien. I didn't know yet how much that chance would cost him. The Moore heist went down like a western, nomads on a dam ambushing a supply train, 4 Arasaka escort cars hijacked and turned, and 3 unhackable Russian heavy trucks put down when Ace webbed onto the lead one and I threaded a single millisecond timed round through the only gap in the armor. We pushed the wrecks off the dam into Santo Domingo and let the local scavengers have the leftovers and hauled off €2 million of controlled equipment that Militech had genuinely believed was scrap. An NCPD idealist named Elias Thorne caught our scent and tailed us into the desert, and rather than kill a good cop, I had Ace shoot his car instead of him, and then reached into his eyes and pointed him at a real clue, the Nightingale Project, a marketing man named Volkov, because a stubborn, honest cop is a tool if you aim him right. He took the bait and started pulling the thread that would eventually unravel the people I actually wanted unraveled. Then we went to war with the Wraiths properly, and it was ugly the way these things are. We wiped a stronghold at Stone Ridge, ran their drug-mad enforcer down until a crane dropped a block on him off my grid, and got ambushed for our trouble by a full Militech mechanized company, which the Aldecaldos beat by burying snipers in the dunes at dusk, when a body's heat matches the sand and thermal optics go blind, and hitting them with rockets and EMP grenades before they knew the desert had eyes. Every fight cost us people we couldn't spare. And in between them, I built Lucas the thing that would decide the whole campaign, a berserk component grown from the same lizard serum, with molecular sieves isolating the rage from his brain, and an antidote wired in as an emergency brake. Lucas was the ideal candidate, big enough to carry it, gentle enough to come back from it, and he took it the way he takes everything, with a joke and a nod, and I tried not to think about his mother's face when I did. Graham was waiting at a cement factory, and Graham was exactly the kind of man this world manufactures and then blames. A coward who'd sold out his own tribe years ago for money, who trafficked in kidnapped children, and who now force-fed Militech firmware to his own men to turn them into disposable cyber-psychos while he kept himself safe in the back. He'd even blackmailed Meredith Stout into using him as bait, threatening to tell the Badlands how incompetent Militech really was. We surrounded the place, the netrunners went in through the pipes, and we breached it in a storm of rockets and smart rounds. And then the floor of the whole plan dropped out, because a Centaur mech tore out of the building, a Militech war machine with an ion cannon and a shield that shrugged off even the cat, its full neural link making it unhackable. We only put it down by improvising, Lucas ramming it with a gantry crane I'd powered off the factory grid, while Ace threaded 2 impossible rounds through the split second the shield opened. That was the bait. The 30 Wraiths I killed downstairs with a demon package were the bait too. Because when I checked the bodies against the database, 2 names were missing, and then a second Centaur came up through the floor with Graham behind it, and the whole underground room came down on us under a focused laser blast. Damien had warned me, in his flat Badlands way, if you don't see the corpse, assume he's alive. I should have listened harder. In the collapse and the chaos, Graham got to Damien, got him alone, the way cowards always find a way to, and by the time we fought through to them, Damien was dying, and still defiant, still spitting at the man who'd ruined both their lives. I couldn't reach him in time, but Lucas could. I'd finished installing the Berserk component, and when Mateo threw himself at Graham to save Damien and got his arms broken for it, when Graham started reaching for the rest of the kids in our crew, Lucas let the rage off its leash. Legs already broken, he didn't need to chase. He just caught Graham, who could not dodge what was coming, and ended him in 3 punches, for Damien, for the tribe, for every child that man had sold. It wasn't enough. Damien died anyway, there in the rubble, with his enemy dead beside him, which is the closest thing to peace the Badlands ever offered him, and there was no time to grieve, because Berserk Lucas was a runaway engine now, and the second Centaur was still standing, and Anya had just fallen into the collapse right in front of it, so I pointed the engine. Lucas, 3 meters of borrowed fury with a chicken bone in his teeth, because the hunger has to feed on something and I'd rather it was food than us, tore the second Centaur mech apart with his bare hands, ripped its focus cannon off its mount, and plucked Anya out of the dirt before the thing could fire. Damien was gone. But everyone still breathing was still breathing, and in the Badlands that's the only victory anyone gets to keep. I did what I do with a captured superweapon. Understand it faster than the people who built it, and then make it worse. I welded the 2 focus cannons into one 9-array monster, fed it off the factory grid and a fuel tank, and built a laser only Lucas was strong enough to hold while it arced and screamed. He cut a Militech Vargas helicopter clean in half with it. Took 2 manticores with the same sweep, then a basilisk rolled in, the heaviest thing Militech owns, and I decided on the spot that we were going to steal it. Here is how you board a tank when you don't have a way onto a tank. You ride Ace's 1,000-horsepower Quadra off a 20-meter cliff, on remote, with 2 men on the roof. Lucas kicked off at mid-air, the car rocketing on without us straight into the Militech line detonating, and the 2 of us came down on top of the basilisk itself. Lucas tore the turret open like a can lid. I dropped inside, hijacked the whole tank solo, and turned its gun on the people who'd been so proud to bring it. Ace's scream of my car carried across the entire battlefield. I added another 1.7 million to the growing list of things I owe her, and in the smoke, we pulled Meredith Stout out alive. Meredith was worth more than the tank. I put her under a lie detector and built our exit out of her own lies. The whole battle got rewritten as Meredith heroically hunting the lizard man through the wraiths, the lizard man having escaped through a breach in the border wall to Mexico, with Graham's Biotechnica-grade arm left behind as the evidence. She had to sell that story to survive, so she sold it beautifully. We even blew the border wall ourselves to make the escape look real, and Meredith put a bullet in the last witness, her own colonel, and sealed the cover-up with her own hand, because that's how you make a corporate lie permanent. You make the liar guilty enough to keep telling it. Militech's official report blamed a dead colonel's command error and closed the file on a bioweapon that had run off to Mexico. Meredith survived, demoted to nothing, $1 million in debt, and paying me for the privilege. The blockade lifted. This job, I told the sunrise coming through the breach we'd made, is done. We buried Damien, and I gave the Aldecaldos something better than a funeral speech, a real business, synthetic blood plasma, and immunosuppressants they could produce and sell, vitality without a corporate leash, a future that didn't depend on charity or on me. And Anya played me a recording that told the rest of Damien's story, the part he'd never said out loud. Years back, Graham had framed Damien's biggest job and burned the camp to the ground, and Damien had gone into the desert after that and become the thing they called the Mexico border butcher, and the reason he guarded us all so obsessively was that he'd looked in the mirror and hated what he saw. "I'm just like Graham," he'd said once, addicted to violence. He wasn't. But I understood the fear, because it's the trap this whole world sets for the people it grinds down. It takes everything from you and then offers you rage as the only thing you're allowed to keep, and calls you a monster when you pick it up. Damien picked it up and spent the rest of his life trying to put it back down, and died protecting a tribe that wasn't even fully his. "Look them in the eyes," his old chieftain used to say. I did. Then the panel flickered, 48 hours on the counter, and it was time to go home and finish the other war. Back in Night City, I paid Brick's crew, kept Mateo, who told me, grinning, that he'd watch my dream come true before his own, and gave everyone my lecture about cyberware addiction, which is really the same lecture as the one about legends, and the one about atom bombs. You are a human being, not a machine, and the moment you forget which one you are, the city wins. Then I switched worlds to find that the other one had gotten worse while I was gone. Tony Stark had come home from a cave in Afghanistan, and in this world the cave didn't turn him into a peacemaker. It doubled his weapons output, because the man who saved him fed him a story that pointed his genius the wrong way, and the war machine spun up instead of down. And somewhere in a bunker I couldn't see yet, an organization was running an algorithm to sort the whole human race into threats, and it had flagged my little CTOS as looking uncomfortably like its own, and quietly raised my threat level for the crime of locking Tony Stark inside an information cocoon I hadn't even built on purpose. HYDRA. It always comes back to HYDRA, the rot that survived the war by putting on a nicer suit, and it had just noticed me. It had also noticed Sterling Thorne and made him an offer. A shadow man in a good suit recruited Norman into what they called a military-industrial club, overseas human experiments, a bio-battlesuit built out of Dr. Viktor Volkov's stolen neural link research and Sterling's own gene modifications. And Norman, drowning in a failing company and a dying son, said yes. That's the whole tragedy of a Green Goblin, if you catch it early enough. It's just a desperate father signing the wrong contract. The first thing he did with his new backers was abandon a researcher named Ethan, and Ethan was already in my sights because Finn had built a beautiful forensic case against him. The man had overworked his students to death on a Sterling device with an aging flaw that gave them cancer, and dressed the whole atrocity up in the language of scientific progress. Thomas Hayes prosecuted. I fed Zoe the tools to gather the evidence physically, offline, out of reach of the network, and warned her the NYPD's own equipment was being monitored by someone powerful because I'd caught the eavesdropping and I knew an intelligence agency's fingerprints when I felt them. Thomas arrested Ethan. Ethan cracked and named Sterling on tape and turned star witness, and Norman's answer was to unleash the first of his monsters. He'd built the Stinger armor onto a kidnapped man, a suit that turns its wearer into an actual scorpion and then kills him, a person redesigned to fit a weapon instead of the other way around, and he sent it to murder the witness convoy. It came in with a tail that flipped cars like toys, and guns did nothing, and it fell to Zoe and Thomas and me and a lot of improvising. Wei Chang flickered into his Shadow Lord self just long enough to carry the wounded Ethan clear. Zoe and I webbed the Stinger down, and a USB hack shut the suit off. I kept the tail's stinger, because a man in my line of work never throws away a good armor-piercing spike. Sterling, I said, has overplayed his hand. And then S.H.I.E.L.D. arrived, and Samuel Stone himself sees the stinger as a biological weapon on Pentagon paperwork and offered me a badge, and I turned it down, but not before I quietly kept the armor's parts and its data, because that stinger and those files were evidence, and evidence is the one weapon that works on a man like Sterling even after the fists stop. I'm not going to fix this city in a mask, I told Stone. I'm going to fix it by throwing out its mayor. He didn't know whether I was joking. Neither, honestly, did I. I went to see Dr. Viktor Volkov because the stinger had been built out of his stolen work, and the people who stole it had made sure he took the blame. I found a broken man. Victor's neural link research had been seized by Sterling and the military, his life's work, meant to give the disabled their bodies back, twisted into a weapon and then hung around his own neck. He'd even heard the rumor that the lizard man tearing up Manhattan was little Finn Hayes, which got a laugh out of both of us that neither of us really felt. I laid it out for him. The stinger was his design plus Sterling's illegal modifications, and that meant it wasn't just a weapon, it was proof, a signed confession in steel. A good scientist ruined by the people he trusted is the most useful ally in the world because he has nothing left to protect and a very specific man to blame. Sterling, meanwhile, had already moved to his next monster. He'd found an old inventor named Julian Cross, whose whole life's dream was flight. Real wings, the freedom of a bird, and he coerced the man into weaponizing his suit with a kidnapped Latvian refugee lined up as the test subject. Cross, when he understood that his dream had been turned into a machine for killing, did the thing that tells you exactly what kind of man he really was under the desperation. He strapped himself in instead. Put it on me, he said, not the refugee, me. While Sterling built killers, I built a healer, because that's the only actual difference between us. I studied the Stinger armor down to its logic, a suit that reshapes a person to fit the equipment, which is Sterling's entire philosophy in one horrifying object, and then I did the opposite. I designed Victor a new neural link chip, quaternary, DNA-based, built on my own foundry's silicon, and I used it to stabilize a single octopus arm without it eating his mind. Victor watched an 18-year-old hand him the breakthrough he'd chased for a decade, and I watched a little bit of the broken man come back to life. We were partners from that moment, though neither of us said it. Then the CTOS screamed. A rhino, a giant armored biotank, another Sterling creation, another man poured into a machine, was rampaging outside the hospital, HYDRA's masked men firing under the cover of it, and Zoe was throwing everything she had at it and bouncing off. There was no time to be clever and no time to be safe. Victor and I built an anti-rhino weapon on the spot, out of the pieces I'd been saving for exactly this. The Stinger's armor-piercing stinger to punch the shell, and an octopus arm exoskeleton to absorb a recoil that would otherwise tear a normal man in half, with my own nerves rated to carry the strain because no one else's could. I pulled my shirt off so Victor could wire it into the cyberware laced through my body, and told him to forget everything he was about to see. Some secrets you keep, some you trade for a life. This was the trading kind. The rhino was a wall with missile launchers, and Zoe was throwing herself at it and buying nothing but time, so I did the thing I'd built the gear for. Swung in on a web, the exoskeleton taking my weight, landed on the monster's back, and drove the Stinger's stinger clean through the shell with the ejector. The pilot screamed. Damaged neural-linked armor compresses its own circuits, and its circuits are wired straight into his nerves, so every dent I put in the machine, he felt in his spine. Then I put the data knife in behind it and wrote it down into the machine's control layer, and that is where I met the thing running Sterling's entire network. Because when I broke into the Rhino, I didn't break into a man. I broke into a server sector that belonged to something that had never been one. I hit it the way a general feels it when he's spent years preparing to blitz Poland, gives the order at last, settles in to watch the steel roll east, and the Poles pull out a Gundam and charge straight for Berlin. Black smoke poured out of a data mind that had never lost a fight in its life. It lost a whole storage sector to me before it got the door shut, and on its way down, it issued an order that told me exactly how big this had just gotten. Sterling Group server breached. Execute Plan B. Increase Kale Lee's threat level. Signed, in a dead man's handwriting, Dr. Klaus Richter. The Rhino stopped, a youthful Cyrus Hammer, near cyberpsychosis, a man drowned in a machine, and while Zoe pried the fainted pilot out of the overheated shell, I told her who we'd really been fighting, Klaus Richter. A HYDRA scientist from the war who'd poured his consciousness into electronics and spent decades running HYDRA's global surveillance out of a military base, and who'd been quietly handling Sterling's network and watching the NYPD the whole time. I'd cut his leash to Sterling with a piece of malware, but I'd also just learned that Sterling was the small fish. Behind him was HYDRA, and behind HYDRA were partners rich enough to make a rhino for pocket change. But you eat an elephant one bite at a time, and the bite in front of me was Sterling. Sterling Group, I said, gets dealt with first. Then the sky came apart. Sterling had coerced Julian Cross into the vulture suit and wired a remote control into it to make the old man a puppet, and the remote failed, and the vulture came off its leash with Sterling Thorn snatched up in its talons, Adrian's head full of a dozen fighting voices, the loudest of them just screaming "Fly higher." My lab trio identified him off the footage, and the oldest moral trap in this whole universe opened up under me. Let it happen, and the worst man in the city dies, and everyone's happier, except the good old engineer, who becomes a murderer forever, ruined for a crime that was done to him. Stop it, and the worst man lives to face a court. And here's the reveal that made the choice heavier. The masked man leading the gang that wanted Sterling dead. The man on the phone in my ear saying blood for blood. He killed my parents. He must die. That was Wei Chang, Shadow Lord. Sterling had experimented on Wei as a child and killed his whole family in the blast, and Wei had spent his whole life building toward this exact moment of watching Norman fall out of the sky. I told Wei no, he'll go to prison, I said. We can control him ourselves, and more of us, more talented, more capable friends, is worth more than one satisfying death. Wei backed down. Partly because if he killed me, he'd lose the one person who could actually finish Sterling. And partly because underneath all the negative energy, Wei is, genuinely, a good man. So I went up after the vulture. Zoe turned a web into a slingshot and fired me into the sky past a 400-meter tower. The octopus arms caught the wall. I pounced on the vulture, put the data knife into the gap in his wings, sank into the suit, confirmed the cyberpsychosis, and burned out the overfired nerves until the old man went limp in my hands, which left me 200 meters up, with dead turbines under me and a very long way down. So I took the suit over with my own nerves, restarted it, glided us in on the vector jets with the octopus arms folded out for landing gear, my brain cells cooking the whole way down. Adrian woke up mid-glide, all the voices in his head finally, mercifully gone. And for one clean moment he was just a man flying, the way he dreamed his whole life. He told me about it on the way down. A poor childhood, a drunk father, a mother who used to sneak him out to fly a kite and then cry the whole walk home, because his father had promised once, when he was young and kind, to take her flying, anywhere she wanted, Rome, Milan, Paris. Why, Adrian asked me, does life always turn for the worse? Not this time, I told him. We landed on Sterling's own tower, safe, and Adrian said, "Thank you, Kale," and fell asleep smiling. Norman I left where he lay, brain damaged. I'd had exactly one dose of emergency medicine, and I'd spent it on the good man. I have never once regretted the math. That's up to you now, Sterling. The ambulance took its time getting there. CTOS, you understand, was down for maintenance that day. The trial buried Sterling under his own history. Stolen lizards and a dead academician, illegal experiments and a dead stinger, human trafficking, a coerced inventor, and then the prosecutor dug up the old case, the one Sterling had spent years burying, the one where he'd experimented on a poor child and blown up an entire family to hide it. That child was Wei Chang. His powers were born in that blast, at the cost of everyone he loved, and now he sat in the gallery watching the man who did it get rid his crimes one by one. Julian Thorne sat there too, sick and conflicted, listening to his father's lawyer plead that it had all been a father's love for a dying son, and the judge answered that the children of the rich and the children of the poor are equal before the law, and that sacrificing 10 of the second to save one of the first is not love, it's a societal sin. The gavel fell on a man who could hear it and see it and not speak or move, sentenced count after count while his eyes did the only screaming left to him. Wei got the judicial blessing to build a special prison and to take what remained of the Sterling group, and the three of us, me, Wei, Ethan, stood over Norman at the end and offered him the one mercy on the table. Sign the company over and we save Harry, who's guilty of nothing but his father. If you agree, blink. He blinked. A week later, I was on television being called the youngest self-made millionaire in the city, maybe the world. A man who in 1 year had built a security company running the NYPD's own systems and a genetics company that had just cleared its name. A kid some people were already saying had surpassed Tony Stark. I gave them the only line I actually believe. It is people who make a society, I said, not money and not power. Your neighbor, your mother, the stranger on the screen. They are the point of everything we build, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Then I used the airtime to throw my weight behind Marco's floor for mayor, my loud, golden-voiced neighbor from Hell's Kitchen, who'd built the Workers' Association with Samuel, the man Crosshair had left hoarse, standing beside him, because I meant what I told Stone about fixing a city by changing who runs it instead of who it fears. Wei swallowed Sterling's factories and hospitals and labs, and started dreaming out loud about raising Sterling Tower and building a second Manhattan out of the slums, one that belonged to the people who lived in it. He pressed a yellowed family photo to his chest and closed his eyes, and for the first time since he was a child in a burning house, Wei Chang got to rest. I should have felt like I'd won. In a way I had. Victor Volkov and Julian Cross both walked into my lab of their own free will and signed on. Two of the finest minds in the world, mine now, and Victor going pale when he studied the burned exoskeleton and realized I'd shot myself full of a serum to survive holding it, asking if it hurt. A little, I told him. But between you and me, stubbing a toe on a table leg is worse than a few burned nerves. I've had a strange life. Here's the thing they don't put in the interview. A year and a half ago, I was a nuclear engineer wanting 5 more minutes of sleep while my cells filed for divorce. Then I was a dead boy in a Queens hospital. Then I was inventory on a Night City harvest table, being priced for parts. And every single time, the universe looked at what was left of me and said, broken, not worth saving. I'm the youngest self-made millionaire in New York now, and a ghost with a brain-dead nickname in Night City, and the clock that had been counting down my life since the first page has finally, actually stopped. But something happens when you stop being nobody. You start being seen. A net agent named Nightingale in a nice office in Washington has my Blackwall footprints and a personal interest in finding me. A dead scientist named Richter, running HYDRA out of a machine, just raised my threat level with his own smoking, half-broken hands. An algorithm in a bunker has decided my little city watching system looks a lot like its plan for the world, and Cybertech, HYDRA's own company, just walked off with the neural link technology and announced a breakthrough, which means everything I built to save myself is now also in the hands of the people I should fear most. I spent 3 lifetimes and every trick I own becoming a man the world can no longer ignore. That was the goal. It might also turn out to be the mistake. The powerful leave you alone only while you're beneath their notice. I am, all at once, very much above it. The dying was the easy part. Now comes the part where I find out what it costs to be worth killing. The bill, it turned out, was already in the mail. The good news came in first. Victor Volkov and Julian Cross both signed onto my team of their own free will. 2 of the finest minds in the world now working under my roof, and the system opened a whole new laboratory for them. Victor took one look at the burned octopus arm exoskeleton and put it together. That I'd shot myself full of a serum to survive holding the thing, and asked quietly whether it had hurt. A little, I told him. But between you and me, stubbing a toe on a table leg is worse than a few burned nerves. He also realized something about the octopus arm's little onboard AI that made me keep my face very still. It had acted on its own, and it could rewrite a human brain through a neural link. There's a name for that function where I come from. In Night City, they call it a relic. There was a thread pulling at me from farther away too. A boy named Lucas, a refugee I'd pulled out of the wreckage, came from LitRPG, my mother's homeland, a place still living in the Middle Ages under feudal lords, where the flu kills 2 in 10, and a wizard offering an experiment sounds like salvation. There's no Dr. Doom in this world yet, which was a small comfort. My mother is pure Latverian, which makes me half, which makes the place my problem whether I want it or not. So I hired a mercenary company, Scarlet Hawk and her old wild pack, out of work since Sterling folded, and pointed them not at New York but at Latveria, where I was going to grow mechanized agriculture and a better future out of feudal dirt. Genetic research and farming and a private army, I said out loud, and then stopped because I just described biotechnica. The line between saving people and owning them is thinner than anyone comfortable ever admits. My mother, when I got home, checked my face like she was checking a melon for ripeness because she'd watched her son tackle a flying man off a tower on live television. No parent, she informed me, wants their child stopping terrorist attacks. I had no good answer, so I gave her Lucas to fuss over instead, and let the warmth of a home that still had its lights on do the thing it does. Up in the clean offices, the giants divided the spoils. Samuel Stone filed his reports with his arm in a cast. Alistair Thorne, sitting above S.H.I.E.L.D. and secretly rotten with HYDRA, mocked Richter for getting bloodied by mortals and reminded everyone the Deathlock project could not afford more mistakes. Sterling's Rhino Science went to Stark. His neural link tech went to Cybertech, which is HYDRA's own company, which means the technology I built to save my own life is now in the hands of the people I should fear the most, and they announced a breakthrough within the week. The war I'd started between the corporations didn't end when Sterling fell. It just changed hands. That's the thing nobody tells you about winning. The board doesn't clear. It resets, with you closer to the center of it. Then the panel flickered, unstable energy, the old familiar shove, and dropped me back into Night City, where being worth killing had already become a full-time job. 5.5 days had passed on that side while I was gone. The two worlds keep slipping out of sync whenever I wear something new. The Aldecaldos camp had transformed, a full armory, modified war machines, drones, and a basilisk tank resting in the warehouse like a sleeping god. And Ace shook me awake because she genuinely loves shaking idiots, and we rolled out toward the city in the red and black Mackinac, and that's when I discovered I'd accidentally created a legend, and the legend was a pickup truck. Somewhere in covering up the blown border wall, Militech had leaked a blurry photo of my Mackinac, and the city had lost its mind over it. The battle-damaged Mackinac was a status symbol now. 6 street gangers pulled up alongside us to admire the bullet holes and ask which shop did the work. Body shops sold fake Mackinac paint jobs and fake battle damage at a premium. There were Burger King burger ads on every corner because some genius at Whole Foods had dug a 50-year-old hot dog patent out of a drawer to ride the name. A kid with a mohawk was charging fools an intellectual property fee to paint their cars like mine, swearing he'd witnessed the real thing that night. Most of the people who saw it are dead, he explained, hiking the price right up until the actual Mackinac rolled past him, escorted respectfully by a fixer's car, and his customers dragged him off down the street screaming, "Night City." Even the daytime has a soundtrack of somebody getting what's coming to them. The carmaker wanted in on the legend, so old Captain, the fixer who'd inherited Santo Domingo, brokered a deal. Thornton would secretly rebuild my Mackinac with lab-grade experimental tech, stock on the outside, a deformable 400-horsepower tank underneath, a Batmobile wearing a pickup's clothes. I took it. I also asked old Captain for something stranger, high-end puppet chips, not for the obvious reason, but because I needed workers who could run a pharmaceutical process without ever understanding it, secrecy built into the labor itself. He didn't have those, but he had a tip. The 6th Street Gang's number 2, a man called Blitz, was plotting a coup against his boss and shaking down a butcher named Sarah to fund it. Sarah turned out to be a former Biotechnica student running an honest little black market protein shop, feeding Santo Domingo cheap and slipping scraps to the orphanages, which is exactly the kind of person this city grinds up for practice. So when we rolled in on Blitz's crew, I didn't just save her, I turned the whole thing into theater. The Mackinac came in and, impossibly, gloriously, drifted, scattering Blitz's men like bowling pins. Jack punched through a wall to grab the man by the skull, and then I got Blitz's boss on the phone and ran an auction. For Blitz's life. I played the two of them against each other with a synthesized voice, the second in command bidding to live and the boss bidding to have him dead. 50,000, 100, 200, 3 eyes. And when the number peaked, Jack collected, and the boss paid 300 grand for a corpse before his own chip flagged that he'd been talking to a machine the whole time. "Those 3 idiots tricked me again," he told the empty room. I do love this job. Then we went to Sergei's to spend it, and Sergei got to watch his understanding of the human body quietly catch fire. Jack went under first, bones grown to titanium grade with 0 rejection, lizard muscle fiber off every chart he owned, and when he asked what kind of cyberware it was, I told him it was cyberware I'd made myself, and watched him decide not to ask a follow-up. We turned Jack into a walking tank, subdermal armor welded on like plate. We reforged Ace's blades out of my indestructible data knife, so her mantis arms could cut a rocket's shell and hack a circuit with the same swing. And then it was my turn, no anesthetic, a diagnostic panel open, and Sergei saw the truth of me for the first time. Every cell in my body dying and regenerating, every single second, the Sandevistan burning me down to counter the serum keeping me alive, so that my existence is a controlled 1,000-cut wound I've simply stopped feeling. He asked how I stand it. I told him you'd be amazed what a person can get used to. I added 2 external mechanical arms on an exoskeleton, octopus arms, for carrying tools and holding spider silk and sticking to walls, run by the little symbiotic AI I'd been quietly raising, a thing with superhuman coordination and the emotional life of a puppy that had started calling me big brother and sulking when I ignored it. I was admiring my new hands when Netwatch kicked me off the entire network at once. Every access ID I owned, dead. The whole vast web of Night City slamming shut in my face until I stood in a lit room feeling like a man dropped on an island. Then a message threaded through the dark from a network surveillance agent who wanted a word. "Come out and chat," it said. "Just you and me. Let's talk about netrunner things." The agent's name was Dylan, and he was the real thing, a Netwatch elite, his whole head and back rebuilt into heat dissipation gear, which is what the job does to a man who dives for a living. He had a proposition. Back in 2022, the god of netrunners had loosed a virus that woke the machines up hostile, and for 20 years, the net was a killing floor until Netwatch built the Black Wall. That same trembling red-black graveyard I'd already walked into and out of in the Atlanta desert, the AI-eating wall that lets the world go online at all. Somebody had been stabbing at it, and Dylan wanted help hunting them. He offered a network pass as payment. I asked for Netwatch's training materials instead, because knowledge outlasts a permit, and because only an idiot signs his whole life over to contributing to humanity 24 hours a day. Even God took a weekend. He gave me a choice of jobs, and I took the one that let me poke around a club called Clouds, and he handed me a new pass and cleared me, to my great private amusement, of ever being the netrunner who blacked out Corpo Plaza. "Your technique's solid," he said, "but not clever enough to survive an EMP that size." He didn't know I'd burned my brain out 20 times doing exactly that, in a world he'll never visit. Before I dove, I finally sat down and talked to the AI I'd been carrying. I loaded it a language model and it cursed at me, then apologized, then told me it liked being called Big Brother because lots of people called me that, a thing of terrifying capability and no idea what capability means, superhuman with my hands and innocent everywhere else. I walled off its access, capped my own, jacked in the old cheap way for cover, and dropped into cyberspace properly for the first time. Darkness, code streaking past like meteors, a place where you have no body until you build one. I built a featureless man out of light because if I'm the only thing in all of cyberspace with no distinguishing features, then that's a feature. Dylan clocked my raw computing power at 12, passed the flesh and blood ceiling, and got very interested and showed me his data fortress and his pet demon programs like a proud homeowner. Then my little octopus climbed out onto my shoulder uninvited and Dylan went pale because it had taken him 2 years at the academy to build one of those. And the octopus, having grabbed something nasty during the jump, reared up and formed an enormous flickering red and black trident and drove it into his fortress, and his fortress answered with an ion cannon, and the whole of cyberspace shook. Dylan shoved me out of the fight a half second before it took me with it. My access port caught fire in the real world. The room's wiring blew, and the lights went out in a dozen apartments around me, and down in Pacifica, the few lights there flickered too. I patted out the flames, read the automatic bill for the fire extinguisher and the circuit damage, and sent Ace the only message the situation called for. My room's out of power. Can I borrow €2,000? Down in Pacifica, a gang of network-obsessed lunatics called the Voodoo Boys felt the new netrunner in the water and sent someone to find him. Their boss rose out of an ice bath and gave the order. North Watson, the new one, track him down. Back in my dark-burned apartment, Ace sprawled across my suspiciously unslept-in bed. I sleep on the sofa over my books and needled me while I took the fried NetWatch port apart for parts, because being broke is a lifestyle. Then Dylan sent me a partner for the Clouds job, an NCPD detective named Elias Thorne, and told me to go investigate, and with a straight face, not to break any laws. Elias turned out to be that rarest Night City creature, an honest cop, and he'd posted his job on the police bounty board because he refused to use a fixer, and his partner had bet $5 the whole thing was somebody trolling him. Then Jack cracked the doorframe walking into the diner, and both cops looked up and blurted the same 2 words. Desert Cook. See, when Jack tore a basilisk open with his bare hands on the border wall footage, a terrified NCPD spent real resources restoring the video to understand what kind of monster they were dealing with, and their narcotics captain got very excited about something in Jack's mouth, certain it was some new super drug. And after all that painstaking analysis, it turned out to be a chicken bone. So, to feel less afraid, they renamed the butcher a desert cook and filed an official weakness. Subject appears to require a large amount of food before acting. It helps them at lunch. It does not help them in person. The case Elias had was ugly in the specific way that makes even hard people go quiet. A Tiger Claws crew was driving fake patrol cars, snatching people off the street, and selling the recordings on the black market, and the man running it was a monster named Kato, who did it because it paid and because he liked it. I'll tell you the outline and spare you the inside of it, the way I spared Ace and Jack later, because some things you deal with and don't describe. The youngest victim was too young. Elias had a face full of righteous fury and no manpower, and a first thread. The recordings came from a dealer named Lenny, and the whole rotten supply chain ran up through a nightclub to something bigger. Don't cause too many casualties, Elias asked me, and filed the paperwork to keep the other cops off our backs. We took the subway to Twist Street into the fake holographic cherry blossoms of Japantown's flesh market, me in my new NetWatch coat with 2 mechanical arms carrying my boxes of ammunition and tools and grenades and, because Jack insisted, snacks. Kaido's club was called the Phoenix, and I knew the name from a game in another life, but a name with no living thread attached is just a name, so we started pulling the thread. First I paid respects to Haruna Sato, the queen of Japantown, because you don't hunt on someone's turf without asking. She defended the Tiger Claws at first. They employ a lot of people, she said, until I pointed out that the monster snatching people off her streets would eventually bring the Moxes and the Valentinos and the law down on all of it, and then everyone would be hiring me. She saw the sense in it and pointed me at Lenny. On my way out, I told her the true thing, because it buys more than a lie. I'm dying, Haruna, maybe months left, and a man with months will do anything. She sent people to Haywood to check. Lenny was a dealer in the Twist Street underpass, and I hacked his cyberware mid-sentence and let Jack loom until he gave up his suppliers. The Tiger Claws goods came from Kaido, dropped in Kabuki, and then I called Elias, learned Lenny had a bounty on him, and let Ace collect it. We staked out the kabuki drop, and Jack flagged a kid at the pickup point who looked all wrong, furtive and terrified where a pro would be bored. Protect him, I said. Too late. The tiger claws already had him. A man in a demon mask named Ren hauling the boy off to be made an example of, with a plan to take his family too, so we made an example of them instead. Jack got out and flipped their sports car with his bare hands, tore the doors off to use as shields, and pinned a man to a wall with a thrown length of scrap. The Mackinaw came in and drifted through the rest of them. A Mackinaw, drifting, which broke something in every gangster who saw it. And Ace dropped out of the air with her data knife mantis blades and cut through their gear like it was wet paper, while I sat on a rooftop and uploaded a demon that turned all their fancy footwork into a faceplant. The one who called himself their sumo led a charge. Jack met him behind a car door and punched his jaw clean off, and I ran him down with a hijacked car and ended the whole thing from above with a burst of my submachine gun and a small EMP. That's a wrap, I said to a kabuki full of overturned cars. Now let's build a chain of evidence. The kid we'd saved was named Dimitri, a small-time equipment seller the Tiger Claws had squeezed into running deliveries, and he had a sister named Clara the gang was already hunting to make its point. I didn't have time to babysit siblings, so I handed the job to Mateo and Brick's crew. Go get Clara, bring the Mackinaw. Don't worry about the paint. Meanwhile, Kaito, cornered and screaming in his club, was doing what cornered men do, forcing his best fighters into the field with hostages, buying protection from a corrupt deputy director who'd seal off the whole mega building for him, and cutting a deal with a mysterious weapons supplier who wanted the Clouds network opened up in exchange for saving his miserable life. He even baited an old ex-soldier by dangling a daughter the man no longer had. That's the machine. It doesn't just kill you, it makes you help. Mateo went to get Clara and drove into a small war. The rebuilt Mackinaw plowed the Tiger Claws off the road like a street sweeper. Brick's van finished them, and Brooke cleaned up with grenades. And then the gang's 2 elite fighters came back, demon-masked and Sandevistan fast, and one of them, a philosopher who called himself Akira, and his partner Gian, turned a rescue into a duel at 100 miles an hour. Mateo, who'd wanted to be a legend, got his wish and its price in the same night. He beat Gian, barely, by timing his shots to sound instead of sight, and stood over a cyberpsycho who told him, dying, that he hadn't done it for the gang. He'd done it for himself. If you had cyberware like mine, Gian asked him, would you become me? And then he died before Mateo could answer, and left the question sitting in the kid's chest like a splinter. I've seen where that splinter leads. I didn't tell Mateo. Some things a person has to walk into with their own feet. We brought everyone to Elias's safe house, a shack he'd paid for out of his own pocket because the NCPD wouldn't, and there the case stopped being about one monster and became about the rot behind him. Because Elias's partner, a cop named Nora, had a chip, and on the chip was a girl's last message to her mother before she vanished. Mom, help me. I think I've been kidnapped. I think I'm on a boat. And when Dimitri and Nora started screaming at each other about whose fault it was, Dimitri said the thing that made the whole room go silent. When the Tiger Claws grabbed people, your patrol cars were right next to them. When the victims called, the dispatchers just watched. That's the part they don't put on the recording. The monster sells the tape, but the city holds the camera steady while he films. Then a senior cop named Fuller strutted into the safe house to seize the case and the witnesses, per orders from above, because the rot has a chain of command. Elias refused. Jack stood up, blotting out the light, and asked Fuller whether his forehead was harder than a basilisk's hatch, and dared him to call Max Tack and ask if they'd met before. And while Fuller sweated, I stopped his breathing with a flick of cyberware, and we loaded the sleeping officer back into his own car, which Jack casually caved the bumper of on the way. The other cops decided their captain was very tired and left, and something broke loose in Elias and Nora, the 2 honest ones. Nora announced she'd steal the evidence herself, and Elias, a man who'd spent his whole life believing in the system, looked up at the moon and said, "Unreliable laws? Then to hell with them." That's the sound a good person makes when the institution they trusted finally shows them the camera holding steady. It's the most dangerous sound in any city. I sent the Flex siblings out to the Aldecaldos, where a hunted nobody can become a somebody, and gave Ace my usual speech about why I bother saving small frightened people, because most of the world is the frightened middle, and if you climb all the way to the top only to sit on the golden toilet the last monster built, you haven't won anything. Then we prepped, and I dove the NCPD with Elias and Nora walking my hands inside, cracking the firewall, dropping their netrunner in 50 milliseconds. And in the core database, my little octopus begged to help, and I let it. And it swelled up past every limit and started ripping whole data vaults out by the roots. The system pop-up called it a new talent, data grabbing, and I called it a disaster because the server couldn't survive that kind of appetite. Grab the braindance files, I shouted at it. Don't grab everything. It grabbed too much anyway. The lights flickered. I told Elias to run and flip the breaker, and we walked out past our own pounding hearts just as the station's alarms went off, because my AI had burned the NCPD's storage server to slag. You broke into us, Elias said afterward, so why is our server the one that's fried? Improper operation, I told him, but don't worry, I backed up the burned data, and I'll sell it back to you at a friendship price. He put his face in his hands. I rose out of a cooling tank gone warm to find Jack and Ace standing over me with buckets, having genuinely believed I was about to cook, while my two mechanical arms swayed at my sides like a puppy that knows it did something wrong. To find the Phoenix, I had to go into a dying man's dreams. I built a device that reads unconscious memory, and I steered it with keywords, and I would not let Jack or Ace watch, because living inside a trafficker's head is not something you do to people you like. I stayed detached and let the octopus handle the parts I didn't want to feel. I walked Liang Kai's memory and pulled the shape of the whole pipeline out of it. People taken off the street, warehoused in shipping containers, graded and sold onto the Phoenix and to Clouds, and the small gray road by which an ordinary loser becomes the man doing the taking. The specifics I'll leave in his skull, where they belong. What I came out with was a location, the Phoenix. That was enough. Inside that club, Kaido was busy proving he deserved the roof I was about to drop on him, executing his own wounded fighter to make a point, leaning on a hostage to force another into a suicide run, selling the Clouds network to a shadowy supplier who called him a good dog, and taking a phone call from a deputy director sweating an election year, who promised to seal off the whole mega building and swore that Desert Cook was nothing, just a chef who got lucky in the Badlands. Everyone in that tower spent the night lying to each other. I spent it getting ready. I tuned up Brick's crew on the way, let the little octopus flush with all that stolen data, optimized their pirated cyberware until Brick's aim stopped shaking, and laid out the plan, hit the Phoenix and Clouds both, fast, before the deputy director's lockdown buried the evidence for good. Then I handed the whole NCPD corruption dump to a fixer named Karina to leak, and Ace put a sniper round through a Tiger Claws drone chasing a train, and I sat back to watch the city catch fire the honest way, on television. It worked better than a bomb. One channel screamed terrorist attack and thanked Arasaka for the riot support. Another showed Arasaka war drones lighting up Kabuki, and underneath both, the truth leaked out of a citizen nobody could name, that the untouchable mega building held kidnapped people serving the officials who protected them, tied to every disappearance the NCPD had shrugged off for months. Mayoral candidates lined up to look concerned. The deputy mayor called the group liars, and every scrap of the criminal data went up on the news site for the whole city to read, over one plain line from the people who'd stolen it. If you still have a conscience, get out of our way. Everyone could be next. The Phoenix was a horror with the lights on, and I'll only say that what they'd done to the people who passed through it was the kind of thing you don't describe, and leave it there. Mateo hit it against my orders, and the fight went sideways when Kaido's last goated cyberpsycho came off the leash, the murdered soldier the gang had broken by dangling a daughter he no longer had, and it ended with a club full of bombs and almost nothing else because Kaido had already gutted the place and moved his real business up to Clouds. Then a stray missile from the overpass war above came down through the roof and blew the Phoenix off the map, and I told Mateo to hand it to Karina and called it done. The overpass war was me, in the flying tank. The rebuilt Mackinac real engine put out 2,000 horsepower under the 400 it showed the inspectors, and it had a hidden cannon, and the three of us ran a Tiger Claws drone swarm ragged through the slums, Ace driving, Jack working the gun like a tank loader, me running the whole battlefield from a cyberspace jack with no cooling tank, heat sinks steaming on the car's own air. The drone operators watched 50 of their men die, then their drones, and started to sweat, and then the Mackinac reversed into their convoy and knocked car after car off the overpass while Ace flipped them the finger. Then the NCPD sent a gunship, which against an armored car on the ground is a death sentence. So I took the car off the overpass entirely. 57 meters up over Kabuki, but under 10 meters down into Westbrook if you land it right, and I'd done the math. We drove off the bridge through a gap Jack blew in the guardrail, and Jack leaned out the window and caught the gunship's landing gear in his bare hands on the way past, and rode it down. Two cops at the blockade below watched an armored pickup fly, bite a helicopter out of the sky, and slide to a stop honking its horn like a man annoyed at traffic, and the veteran of the pair calmly moved his squad car into a trash heap to let the legend through. We shed the battered armor, the Mackinac molts, it turns out, back into an ordinary truck under optical camo and an electromagnetic shield, and parked it invisible by a dumpster while Ace cooed at it like a pet. Up in the top of Mega Building H8 in the Clouds Club at the summit of the city, Kaido watched himself named on every channel and understood, for the first time in his life, what it feels like to be the one on the hook instead of the one holding the camera. 3 broke nobodies had killed hundreds of his men, downed his drones, taken a police gunship out of the sky, and were now climbing floor by floor straight up toward him, and there was nowhere left above him to run. We went up through Mega Building H8 like a rumor, and I locked the whole tower down from a property panel on the way. Elevators dead, security doors sealing, the estimated repair time helpfully listed as negative 32,000 hours, which is what happens when a counter runs off the end of its own math. 3 of us made the suppressive weight of 30 elite soldiers, tech sniper fire routed through the building's own cameras, spider silk grenades slung up a floor, and when a magazine ran dry, Jack's fists and Ace's blades at the corners while I painted targets. Dylan fed me net support the whole climb, half screaming over the comms that we'd agreed to investigate a gang, not expose the city's rot and storm the police, and then quietly deciding that none of that was technically his problem, and telling me to do whatever I wanted. He was watching. By the top floor, Ace was firing into empty rooms out of sheer disappointment that there was no one left to shoot. We found the Clouds management, and I made one of them lead us down, and then we found the room the whole business was really about. I'm not going to take you inside it. What I'll tell you is that it made the 3 of us, who are not soft people, go completely silent, and that whatever you're imagining is kinder than the truth, and that some rooms you clear and then never speak of again. Kaido himself we found stepping out of the server room, and Jack put him on the floor, and there Kaido discovered that all the expensive life support cyberware he'd bought to keep himself alive now simply would not let him die. He ran his whole playbook from down there. We have no quarrel. I'm just a small piece of a big machine. I give these people work, kill me, and they starve. And I told him, the only true thing left to tell a man like that, I can give them work. What does that have to do with you? Then I sold his life and his data to Karina, who already had a buyer, and left him to the arithmetic. That should have been the end. I plugged into the Cloud's database to take my prize, and it came apart too easily, and something in the back of my skull that has kept me alive across 3 lifetimes started to itch. So I asked Dylan a question. Do you know what a honeypot is? Because I don't think Clouds is the honeypot. I think the whole thing was, the case, the club, all of it, bait laid out to catch one specific kind of abnormal person, and I have a bad feeling about which abnormal person. Dylan went quiet for a long 10 seconds. Then he told me the truth, which I'll give him credit for. It could be a trap, he said, and I hope you walk into it. It's the most dangerous job I've ever offered anyone, and I've got maybe a 60% chance of pulling you back out, and you're still the best shot I could find. Double the pay. I looked at Jack and Ace and told them the danger and the reward, and they didn't hesitate because they never do. We're mercenaries, Ace said. If we can do it with a clear conscience or even clear one, then it's worth more, not less. Fair enough. I already knew that if the details of this ever got out, people would say the same thing they always say about me, 3 idiots who knew they were bait and swam deeper anyway. But show me a legend who got there without doing something that looked exactly that stupid. I stroked the little octopus, told it there'd be plenty to eat, plugged the Sandevistan straight into my own spine, and sent it into the vault. The trap sprang the way traps do, all at once, and too late to matter. In the Arasaka tower, in the deep servers, netrunners started shouting that the target had entered the honeypot, that the soul killer was activating, that the target was the honeypot. Something the size of a warship formed in the black of cyberspace and reached down for a hidden data stream, and Netwatch answered its own alarm and deployed a hunter unit called the Dragon after it. And somewhere behind all of it, a codename I'd never heard sat watching me with a controlled AI weapon in its hands, the Emperor, and raised my threat level with a satisfaction I could feel from inside the wire. Down in Pacifica, 2 voodoo boys who'd been sent to find the new netrunner watched a warship tear the sky of cyberspace open, watched one of their own get burned out of his chair for standing too close, and traced the whole storm back to a single address, Mega Building H8. On a static torn screen behind them, the news was already writing the lie, the one that would be waiting for me when I climbed out, that the gang who attacked the mega building had massacred everyone inside. The frame was set, the trap was closed, the whole city had my name now, and every powerful thing in 2 worlds was finally, fully looking at me. The netrunner they'd been sent to hunt, one of them said, might be a rookie in cyberspace, but not in the real world. I came into this story a dead man 3 times over, priced for parts, written off by a universe that kept telling me I wasn't worth saving. I clawed my way up until I was worth everything. A cure, an empire, a legend, a name in the mouth of every giant that runs these 2 worlds. That was the whole plan, from the first freezing minute on that harvest table. And here, 400 meters up in a burning tower, with a data god's jaws already closing around me, is where I finally get to learn the price of it. So, ask me again when I climb out of this one. If I climb out of this one, that'll be its own kind of victory.